Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Michael drove up to the house in a white foreign car, parked the car near the driveway, and to a whistling tune, hurried to his parents' house. The 25-year-old man was in high spirits. He was going to propose to a girl he liked today. He had been going to a cafe where Adriana worked as a waitress for several weeks and tried to get her favor. However, the girl behaved in a detached manner towards him. She did not repel the guy, but she did not let him near her either. Michael patiently waited for Adriana to deign to respond to his proposal to meet with consent. And that day came, and they had been dating for more than a month. The guy rang the doorbell and waited impatiently for his mom to open the door. Michael knew that his father was still at work, so he chose the moment when he was not home to talk to his mother. Soon the door created Betty, and seeing her son on the threshold, exclaimed, "Why didn't you warn her that you were coming over? And do you even have your own keys to open the door? You have to make your mother get up to open the front door. I wanted to disturb you so that you could get away from the TV and meet me on the doorstep." Michael replied with a smile and kissed his mother on the cheek. Betty gently stroked her son's head and then followed into the living room. The young man followed his mother, and without waiting for the landlady to sit down, spoke to his mother. "I come to you with news, but good news. You probably remember that I told you about a girl I like very much. Anyway, she and I started talking, and I think I'm in love, although I'm not making any sense right now. I've fallen in love with a girl, and I don't think I have. I remember you used to walk around with an urn all the time. What are you trying to tell me? I want to ask her to marry me. It's time for me to start a family. And it's time for you to have grandchildren too," the young man said with a smile. "Oh yeah, you've only known this girl for a couple of months, and you're already in a hurry to put a collar around her neck. You are sure of your feelings. Son, I'm sure of it. You have no idea what a nice girl she is," the son said enthusiastically. "Don't answer so hotly at once. You'd better tell me about your anger. Who is she? Who are the parents? I understand that you started this conversation to inform me about the future acquaintance with your fiancé. How smart are you? And you've got it right," Michael said with a smile, and then began to tell his mother about his beloved. Betty learned from her son's narration that the girl is 22 years old and works as a waitress in a small cafe. She is from the village. She rents a room with a friend. The girl's name is Adriana, and she has never been married before. Michael's mom didn't have enough information. She started asking about Adriana's parents, who they are, and what they do. However, the son grumbled at these questions and asked why such meticulous details about the life of the chosen one. Betty wanted to answer the tycoon, but immediately changed her mind, as she realized that the boy would not give any intelligible answers. He just didn't know them. The old woman then asked her son when the acquaintance with the girl would take place, and here the young man smiled and said that it would be tonight. Betty splashed her hands. She didn't expect it to be this day. Michael, seeing his mother's reaction, laughed and then hugged her and asked her not to worry. The older woman threatened her son playfully with her fist and mouthed, "This is not the way to do it. You should have told me about it in advance. I would have at least prepared a festive dinner in honor of it. Now I'll have to order something from the restaurant. Mom, you don't have to set the table. We'll just have tea and cake tonight. It'll be easier that way. I told you Adriana comes from a simple family, and she's not much for formal occasions. Okay, you got it. I guess I'll just have to tell my father myself," Betty said, smiling. "You're right on the money, as always," the boy replied, and then kissed his mom and immediately left the apartment. After a while, Michael and his girlfriend were sitting in the living room at his parents' house. The young man watched his mother asking tactfully questions to the guests. Adriana answered the landlady without any embarrassment. Soon their conversation was interrupted by the boy's father, Benjamin. The man from his wife already knew a little about the election of Michael, but nevertheless, like his wife, wanted to know everything about the girl. After all, The son is going to marry Adriana, so he approached her. Are you a waitress? Are you really going to run with a tray in the hall all your life, waiting for tips? Michael involuntarily wrinkled his nose at his father's question. He understood perfectly well that his father did not like where Adriana worked. The young man looked at the election to see her reaction. The girl, however, calmly answered Benjamin that the place of work suited her quite well, and she did not consider it shameful to take a tip when people themselves offered it of their own free will. As soon as Adriana's reply sounded, the landlord glanced at his wife, who was looking thoughtfully at her guest. The elderly woman felt her husband's gaze and turned to him. She understood perfectly well that the girl did not like the answer. And only Betty wanted to say something as Michael spoke. Dear parents, now is not the most important thing, where Adriana works, because I can assure you that only we will legalize the relationship with her. Then my wife will stay at home. And I can assure you that our wedding will happen in the very near future, as I am going to ask for Adriana's hand and heart today. And after this phrase, the guy turned to the girl and softly said, you are ready to become my wife and live the whole life together with me. Adriana was not embarrassed at this question. It was as if she knew that today Michael would propose to her. The girl was silent and did not hurry to answer. And the young man waited impatiently for his chosen one to speak. A few minutes passed, and Michael could not stand it and again made a proposal. And only then Adriana, smiling, said that she was ready to become a spouse. The guy sighed with relief and tenderly kissed his chosen one on the cheek, and then cheerfully told his parents to prepare for the wedding. As soon as the son with his future daughter-in-law left, then Betty softly said to her husband that she did not particularly like Adriana. Her husband looked at her husband with surprise and asked, "What, this girl did not please you? You see, she acts like a queen." Michael said that Adriana is from the village, and village girls behave modestly and are embarrassed when they first meet a guy's parents. I didn't see any embarrassment here. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just my personal opinion. Honey, do you know better? I'm just confused by Adriana's answer about the profession. You know, it would be embarrassing in front of our friends and acquaintances. If Michael's wife works as a waitress, you realize that our family is quite well off. You and I are entrepreneurs, and our son too. So you see where I'm going with this. However, Michael said that after the wedding Adriana will not work there, but you need to talk to your son about it. I'll be sure to talk to him. And I will also try to meet with this girl alone before they apply to the registry office, thoughtfully said her spouse. Betty called her son after a couple of days after this conversation with her husband and asked about Adriana's job at the cafe. Michael was surprised by his mother's question and asked her why she would do that. The interlocutor replied that she just wanted to talk to the girl. The boy dictated the mother's address. Betty met Adriana at a cafe and returned home after the conversation. In a dejected mood that did not escape her spouse, the husband sympathetically asked his wife what had happened. Blagoviuvi replied that she drove to her son's girlfriend at work and caught her at the same table with a friend Michael. Benjamin responded with a surprised expression. But it's not a crime. It might be, but the fact is that the son's buddy was holding Adriana's hand, and then, as she noticed me, she abruptly removed her hand and became very embarrassed. In my opinion, it was not a friendly handshake. And then Ethan, seeing me, said hello and left in a hurry, which is not like him at all. You know, he's always friendly with us. But okay, that's not the point. Next, I tried to talk to Adriana about her feelings for our son. She said that she loves Michael and added that she doesn't like strangers prying into her soul. You realize Adriana called me a stranger, and I'm her future in-laws. I mean mother-in-law. How do you like that, Benjamin? After his wife said that, he frowned. He did not like what he heard. The man nervously rubbed his nose and asked his wife if she was going to tell Michael about it. The woman nodded in response and picked up her phone, dialing her son's number. She wanted to communicate with him immediately. Michael answered. Betty, without preamble, asked him to come over to their house in the evening. The boy agreed and was soon at his parents' house. As soon as he entered the apartment, he turned to his mother. "I know why you called me. Adriana called me and told me everything. She said you're prejudiced against her, and I'd like to know why. Although I can answer that for you. You both don't like that she's a waitress." "What do you mean, prejudiced?" the mother said, perplexed, and looked at her husband, who was looking at her son with a frown. And then Betty, seeing that her husband is not in a hurry to enter into conversation, said, "I just wanted to talk to your chosen one, and I did not say anything bad even. Adriana, by the way, sat with your friend Ethan at the cafe where she works and held hands with him nicely. I think that's exactly what she didn't tell you. What are you trying to say? Ethan knows that Adriana is my fiancée, and they get along great, and it's not like he stopped by her place of work. Mom, just say you're not happy with my girlfriend just because she's not from a wealthy family. It's more honest," the son said softly. Betty looked sadly at her son and said quietly that she wanted to see him happy in the future. She was worried that Adriana was marrying for money and not for love. Michael looked reproachfully at his mother and asked her not to talk about it again. And as soon as he said, his father immediately turned to him. "I promise you that Mom will not talk about it again, but you must also give me your word that Adriana will quit her job. And when are you going to apply?" Adriana happily agreed to stay home after the wedding. "We're going to the registry office. We'll be celebrating in a couple days. Whatever my fiancé wants, since I promised her that." Time flew by, and soon there was a lavish wedding with a lot of people. The newlyweds were given a lot of gifts and money, and the couple, after celebrating the big day, soon went on a wedding trip abroad. Returning from the trip, Michael asked his wife what she was going to do. After all, from the cafe quit before the wedding. Adriana replied that she would sit at home, since she did not want to work at the moment. Her husband happily agreed. He himself mentally dreamed that his wife did not work, but was a housewife who faithfully waits for her husband after a day's work. A couple of months passed as the weddings thundered on. Michael was working and Adriana was living a life of pleasure. She attended fitness workouts to spas. The young woman liked the fact that her husband was ready to fulfill her every whim, which she invariably took advantage of. The only thing that Adriana did not like was the frequent visits of her mother-in-law, who often hinted that Adriana was spending money. And so the girl once appealed to her husband to talk to her mother so that she did not come to us so often. "As soon as I see Betty, I get mopey. She'll give me a stern look. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And I often hear her tell me I'm wasting my money. Oh, sweetheart, it's Mom. How can I stop her from coming over? I don't think you see my mother that way. She's trying to help you and me. I'll talk to her about the money." Adriana nodded contentedly in response, but didn't say anything. Michael called Betty after the conversation with his wife, and embarrassed, asked her to come over less often. He then added that she should stop rebuking Adriana with finances. This request from her son was a shock to the mother, and the woman involuntarily thought that Michael could only say such words under the influence of Adriana. Betty decided to speak frankly with her daughter-in-law in private. The woman chose the right moment and came to visit. Adriana saw her mother-in-law on the doorstep and pressed her lips together. Michael's mother noticed it and softly spoke. "I don't understand you at all. Why you are turning Michael against me. You know very well that if I tell you about spending too much, it's the truth. You are still quite a young woman, and you could have gone to a higher institution to get a profession. You've completed 11 grades, and you're not even thinking about a major. I understand that you are going to live off your husband and not work. I don't understand you. Your son is happy with me. What more do you want? Michael, I don't mind staying home and not working. And about money, I don't think you should look into our wallet. My husband and I don't meddle with you. You're wrong, and I can tell you why. You probably forgot that we give you a penny every month, and not a bad one. So I have a right to talk about money," Betty replied calmly. "Okay, I hear you, but I'm going to tell my husband about this conversation. And if you have a conflict, don't accuse me of it later, the daughter-in-law said. Betty did not continue the conversation and silently left. At home, the woman told her husband about the visit to her daughter-in-law. Benjamin was unpleasantly surprised by the behavior of his daughter-in-law and only wanted to tell about it. As they heard the sound of the door opening from a hallway, Michael entered the living room. The parents immediately noticed the frown on their son's face. Betty guessed. The boy's visit was related to today's conversation with her daughter-in-law, and the landlady turned out to be right. As the young man said in a rather rude manner, I promised you that Adriana would not work. So why don't you, father, keep your word? Today my mother was at Adriana's place and rebuked her for being a victim. When I came home, I saw my spouse with tearful eyes. Don't talk to your parents like that. Don't forget that your family is still financially dependent on us. And if the mother made a remark to Adriana, it was done on the merits, the head of the family said in response. Excellent. Now you have reproached me for using your money. Then don't give me any more money. We'll live on our own somehow. Michael said sharply and left the apartment at the same moment. Betty hoped that her son had said that in his heart and would call first in a couple of days. But that didn't happen. The woman was genuinely worried about the rift with Michael. She offered her spouse to be the first to go to reconciliation, but her husband said that it was not worth it. 10 days flew by, and Michael still did not call his parents. Neither did the daughter-in-law. The woman knew that the son is currently on a business trip and therefore decided that it was necessary to first establish relations with the main. Betty got ready and drove to Adriana's house. Her door was opened by her sister-in-law, who unceremoniously said that her mother-in-law's visit was undesirable at the moment. The guests tactfully asked her to invite her into the apartment, but the daughter-in-law refused. Betty was about to leave, as noticed on the rack in the hallway another man's jacket. The woman looked at it and asked Michael at work, "Who's your guest?" "No one in his absence." "What kind of silly speculation is that?" Betty only at that moment noticed that Adriana was wearing a hastily thrown silk robe, so she pushed her sister-in-law aside with her hand and entered the apartment. She hadn't even made it to the living room before she heard a man's voice say, "Adriana, honey, are you taking so long to pay for sushi?" Betty immediately recognized the voice of her son's friend. It was Ethan's. The woman walked briskly into the living room and saw Michael's buddy lying on the couch with his bare torso. Ethan turned at the sound of footsteps entering and looked embarrassed. Betty, barely holding back from shouting, muttered, "How are you both not embarrassed?" "Ethan, Michael is your friend. He's helped you out so many times with free money, and you betrayed him. Have you no shame?" Then the guests turned to her daughter-in-law and said, "And how could you afford it? From the wedding was only a few months, and you are already tumbling with another man. Why did you marry Michael then? Was it just so you could be wealthy?" At this time, Ethan stood up and pulled on a t-shirt. The man then approached Betty and asked her to calm down. The woman gave the guy a resounding slap in return. The young man rubbed his cheek and said, "I understand your outrage. But the thing is, I love Adriana, and she loves me. Yes, Michael is my friend, and I was going to tell him about our relationship in the near future. It's just that your son and I started courting Adriana together. She made her choice in favor of Michael. But after a while, she realized she didn't love him. You can't blame her for that. Let me tell you myself, Michael, he's a good man and a good friend. He should understand everything." Betty listened to Ethan in silence. The woman didn't know what to say at the moment, for she was overwhelmed with feelings, disgusted with the couple. The guests looked disdainfully at the couple and spoke to Ethan with disgust. "Get out of here, and don't come back here until your son gets here. And remember, you have to tell me everything. Michael the day he arrives, and if you don't, I'll tell him myself." After that, the woman turned to her daughter-in-law and spoke, "And you too must confess everything to your husband. I hope that you have not completely lost your conscience and try to tell your husband truthfully how you gave him horns. A few days passed. Betty waited anxiously for her son's return. And the day came. Michael showed up at his parents' house the next day. The mother looked carefully at her son, trying to see if he knew about everything. The young man saw that his mother was worried about him, and he quietly said not to worry. Then he added that he already knew about Ethan's relationship with Adriana. Betty anxiously asked him what he was going to do. Michael replied that Ethan was to blame. He's the one who seduced Adriana. That's what my wife told me. And they had it one time. The day you came to visit. You knave fool, exclaimed the mother, who did not expect such words from her son. And then she realized that Michael knew the whole situation only from Adriana's words. He had not spoken to his friend yet. Betty, as soon as she realized it, said softly, "Have you talked to Ethan or not? He promised me he'd tell you himself." "No, call your friend now, and have him come here right away. I want him to tell me everything in front of me." Michael looked glumly at his mother. The boy didn't object to his mother and complied with her request. Ethan answered immediately and said he would be there within the hour. Betty, hearing that the buddy would be arriving shortly, she nodded satisfactorily. An hour later, Ethan was sitting at his friend's parents' house, and in the presence of the landlady, he told her about his relationship with Adriana. Michael learned about the fact that the mate had been dating his wife for over a month now. Ethan also revealed that he sincerely loves Adriana and is ready to marry her immediately after the divorce. Michael looked at his friend sternly. At the moment, he didn't know who to believe. Only yesterday his wife had assured him that she had been intimate with Ethan only once, and now it turned out to be a completely different story. Michael was closely watched by his mother. The woman understood that her son is now unbearably difficult morally, and the young man nervously rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. A pause hung in the room. Betty and the guest waited for Michael to speak. He, in turn, stood up and spoke clearly. "I've lost my friend anyway. And the rest, Mom, you'll find out later. And you, Ethan, it is no longer your concern. And a huge request never to appear on my horizon again. I don't want to see you under any circumstances. Just forget you ever had a friend." After these words, Michael kissed his mother and, without paying attention to his friend's outstretched hand, left the apartment. Ethan apologized to Betty and hurried after his friend. Michael, however, as soon as he saw that his former friend was catching up with him, told him firmly to stay away from him. Ethan tried to explain himself, but his companion looked at him menacingly and repeated his request with contempt. Meanwhile, Adriana was waiting for her spouse at home. She knew that her husband had gone to his mother. The young woman had already had a word with Ethan before then and asked the man to say that they had been intimate once. However, the lover said he would not do so. The young woman still hoped that Ethan would fulfill her request. And so Michael walks into the house, where the wife is sitting meekly on the couch. The girl looked at her spouse and immediately realized that her husband was talking to Ethan. Adriana lowered her gaze to the floor, waiting to see what her spouse would say. Michael came up to her and asked softly, "Why did you lie to me yesterday? Why did you lie to me yesterday?" "Ethan just told me about everything recently." "What are you talking about? You know perfectly well. You don't have to lie to me right now. It's not the best thing to do. In your case, it's more important for me to know the truth. Only then we can do something about it. I don't like lies, and I ask you to always tell the truth." In a low voice, the husband said, "Yes, Ethan and I have met many times, but I don't know what came over me. Your mother always reproached me for something, and I needed to vent, and I found Ethan to be that support. You're gonna ask me why not you. I'll tell you. It was hard for me to complain about your mother. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. I only love you. Believe it or not, I'm very sorry for what I did. Yes, I am. What else do you want me to say? I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. You want to throw me out like a toy? Go ahead." After that, the young woman covered her face with her hands and cried. Michael looked at his wife, and it was unbearably painful for him to see a loved one crying. He went to her, lowered himself down, and gently kissed the barrel of her ear, and then said that he wanted to forget about the affair and never remember it again. Then he gently added, "Let's start fresh. I promise I'll never remember it, but you won't cheat on me again. This is the only way you and I can save our marriage. Understand that I love you very much, but I want to know that you feel the same way about me." Adriana responded by hugging her husband, crying and thanking him for his generosity. Michael tenderly pressed his wife to him and then kissed her on the lips, adding that from that day on it would be one and everything would be fine in the future. Several months flew by after Adriana cheated on Michael. Adriana completely stopped communicating with Ethan, and soon the young woman became pregnant. She was not particularly happy about this circumstance, as she did not want to burden herself with the troubles of a child. Therefore, Adriana decided, without saying anything to her husband, to terminate the pregnancy. The young woman went to the Women's Counseling Center and soon received a referral for hospitalization. However, Adriana did not manage to do as she had planned. Michael saw the referral, which the girl forgot to remove. The man immediately turned to his spouse. "What do you mean? You are pregnant and did not put me on notice. You and I agreed that there would be no more secrets between us. We're not ready to become parents at this time. You said yourself there are still business problems. And as far as I know, your mother's back to helping you financially, which you're not refusing. That's not an argument to terminate the pregnancy. I'm against it," the young man said emphatically and defiantly tore up the referral for hospitalization. Adriana realized that there was no point in arguing with her husband, because in this situation he would insist on his own. The girl shrugged her shoulders in displeasure and mumbled that then she would need double care and attention. Michael, hearing Adriana's words, looked at his wife with a joyfully perplexed look and asked her if you lacked my attention. "I don't mean that. Since I'm in an interesting position, I need to go to a sanatorium to rest." "All right, sweetheart. Everything you said is no problem." Michael was delighted that he would soon become a father, and he was eager to share his joy with his mother. Betty took the news with delight and congratulated the young family from the bottom of her heart and advised her son to be attentive to his other half. Time passed, and at the due date, Adriana gave birth to a baby boy who was given the name Liam. Michael rejoiced over the event like a child. He, while his wife was in the hospital, managed to make repairs in one room, organized it as a nursery. In this man was helped by his mother. She picked up wallpaper, and Betty, together with her husband, bought a stroller and a crib. Adriana did not appreciate the efforts of her mother-in-law and husband. The young woman saw that the room was now a nursery instead of a bedroom. Disappointed sighed Betty, noticed the grieved look of her daughter-in-law, and in bewilderment asked her daughter-in-law what she was not satisfied. The girl, holding back her displeasure, softly mumbled, "Now my husband and I have no bedroom. I told Michael that it's too early for us to have children. So when are the living conditions not ready? What kind of nonsense are you talking about? So live many families in a 2-room apartment when one room is given to children and the second room is occupied by parents," replied the mother-in-law. "But you live with your husband in a 3-room apartment, and Michael had a separate room, and you have bedrooms," Adriana said haughtily. Michael felt that if his mother continued the conversation with his wife, a quarrel might break out. So the young man, in order to diffuse the situation, suggested that they all sit down at a festive table and celebrate the birth of their son. Michael's idea was taken up by his father, saying to his daughter-in-law, "You gave us an heir, for which we are very grateful. And now, if you have a beautiful daughter in the near future, you will have a 3-room apartment. No more children. I gave birth to Liam, and that's the end of it," Adriana replied firmly. Time moved slowly. Michael hurried home after work to babysit his son, and his wife, meeting her husband, complained that she was very tired to take care of the child, as the baby requires constant attention. The head of the family did not understand how Adriana can be tired of his son. Michael even addressed the mother on this occasion. He briefly outlined the situation. Betty listened attentively to her son, and without any shyness explained that Adriana loves herself too much and wants all the attention to be directed only to her. A year after Liam was born, Adriana said that the baby should be placed in a nursery. Betty was against this and was very clear about it. Liam is still very young. We should wait until he is at least 2 years old. You don't understand how 24 o'clock a day it is to be with a baby. I don't even have time for myself, and I want to have that too. Personal space. But you're a mother. You don't belong to yourself now, because you have responsibilities. And why put the baby in a nursery if you're not going to work? Betty said with indignation. What's work got to do with it? I don't think you heard me. I've been at home for a year without a care in the world. I'm entitled to a vacation, nervously exclaimed the daughter-in-law. Without deceiving others, Michael. As soon as he comes home from work, he immediately deals with his son, and you run to the spa or something. And my grandfather and I often do not rush with my grandson. Adriana did not answer, but pressed her lips together, letting her know that she would do it her way. And as a result, it happened. Just a month later, Liam was registered in the nursery. The baby had been in the nursery for a couple of weeks as a cold. Betty immediately expressed to her sister-in-law that it was too early to put the baby in the nursery, as he was still small. Liam recovered after 10 days. Adriana wanted to take the boy to the nursery again. But here her mother-in-law resented her and said she would not allow it. Michael at this moment listened to the squabble between wife and mother and did not know how to reconcile them. And then the man realized, and he proposed to hire a nanny for the baby at least up to 2 years. Adriana liked the idea, and the young woman gladly agreed. Betty looked reproachfully at her son, letting him know that he had suggested the wrong solution. Michael perfectly understood his mother's displeasure, but at the moment he wanted to please his wife. And only because of this he did not change his decision. And soon Liam had a nanny, who was found through an ad. She was a 30-year-old woman. Her name was Kathy. She quickly found an approach to the baby and performed her duties perfectly. Michael liked the way the nanny treated Liam, but Adriana always had complaints about Kathy. And once again, when Adriana began to reprimand her husband that the nanny was not doing her job properly, her husband couldn't stand it and said, "You know, it's very hard to understand you. You wanted a nanny to look after our son. What's your problem again? Last time you complained that Kathy was looking at her phone screen more than she was doing Liam. And then you claimed she yelled at the baby when he dropped a mug. What happened this time? You just said that to me like I made it up. I didn't say that. I just want to clarify what happened again. Why are you mad at the babysitter?" The head of the family said with a frown in his eyebrows. "Okay, I'll tell you straight up. I saw that Kathy often looks in the refrigerator. Why don't you think it's strange? I mean, she didn't put anything in there. And then I noticed that we were missing some food." Adriana said. The man looked at his wife with bewilderment. This is the kind of news he had not expected. After a little silence, the husband asked his wife if she was sure of her words. Adriana irritably shrugged her shoulders and exclaimed that there was no point in lying to her. The very next day, Michael got up to go to work. He wanted to have a word with the nanny while his spouse was still asleep from the morning. He greeted Kathy as usual, said a friendly hello, and then, without any preamble, told her about the missing groceries. The woman, hearing this, blushed instantly and spoke indignantly. "To accuse me like that, you must have hard evidence. I will not deny that I look in the refrigerator, but only to get food for the baby. We had originally agreed that your wife would give me food for Liam, and I would only need to heat and feed the boy. However, Adriana Viktorovna sleeps until 11 in the afternoon, and I come to you at 8, and I need something to feed the child. So, in order not to disturb your wife, I take out what's cooked myself, and it's warming up. I all realize that, apparently, do not fit on some parameters, Adriana Viktorovna. She often makes me remarks off topic, and I'll be honest, that on these, I give reasonable answers. Just understand, I know my job. And if I make mistakes, I accept criticism adequately. But if you take your wife's comments, they are not justified. I apologize for the harshness. But it seems to me that Adriana Viktorovna should reconsider her views on life and stop picking on me over nothing. If I'm being rude now, you can fire me right now, after what I said. Kathy fell silent and bided her time. Looked at Michael, who stood thoughtfully interlocutor for a while waiting for an answer, and then wanted to add something else, but did not speak. The landlord noticed it and immediately asked, "It seemed to me that you did not say everything." "It all seemed to me. I'm just waiting for your decision." Michael suggested that Kathy take care of Liam. He decided for himself that he should talk to his wife tonight. The man realized he believed every word the nanny said, but the behavior of his wife could not understand. In the evening, coming from work, Michael told his wife about the conversation with Kathy. The young woman took what she heard in a peculiar way. Adriana told her husband that maybe I was wrong, and she was really picking on Kathy, and immediately added that all this is because she is tired and she wants to go to the sea. Her husband suggested waiting a month to go on vacation together. But then Adriana said that it will not be a vacation, as she will have to constantly look after the child. Michael, after this conversation for a couple of days, pondered, and his wife in the meantime, all his affectionately persuaded him to let her go to the sea. And the man decided that there is nothing wrong if his wife would go on vacation, and in a couple of weeks he and Liam would join her. When Betty found out about it, the woman turned on her son with an angry speech. She accused him of being naive and of allowing his wife too much. Michael listened to his mother, but did not change his decision. The young man said, "Mom, I don't see anything wrong if Adriana goes away alone now. Realize that lately she has become agitated. Everything irritates her. I want to see her again as the friendly girl I met. She'll be at sea without us for a couple of weeks, and then I'll join her with my son." Well, don't let them get you again. How was it literally after the wedding? Soon, Adriana went to the seaside. Michael called his wife 2 or 3 times every day. The wife would reply that she was doing well and loved it here. She described how she was spending her time. The husband then thought that he had done the right thing and let his beloved go before them. And then it was time to leave Michael and the baby to the sea, as Adriana called and said that she was leaving for home. On the questions of the spouse about the departure, the wife answered veilingly, without giving specific answers. The man did not argue and said he would meet her when she arrived home. Adriana explained to her spouse that the weather at the resort would be overcast for a week and there would be nothing to do. Adriana saw that her answer upset Michael, so she suggested going to the sea in a month. The man looked at his wife confusedly and said how simple it all works out. Wanted and again on vacation at the resort. And you did not think that this is a big waste in terms of finances. Believe me, the money in our family budget does not fall from the sky. I have to work my ass off practically every day. What are you getting so worked up about? Your parents make a good living. If you ask them, they will not spare a little money for their own son. Listen, but you and I are grown-ups, and we have to make our own budget, not rely on the help of our mother and father. It seems to me that you've forgotten what it's like to earn money. Maybe you should get a job." Michael said irritably. "Is that how you talk? All right, I'll go to work, but let your father tell me later that it's a shame to be a waitress," the wife said defiantly. That evening, Adriana defiantly went to sleep in the children's room. Michael tried to talk to his wife. He absolutely did not want to quarrel with her. However, the young woman haughtily told him that at the moment she did not want any more conversations, and the man had nothing left but to go to bed alone. The day after this conversation with his wife, Michael went to work in a gloomy mood. He was worried about his rift with Adriana. He was even more worried that his wife would actually go to look for a job as a waitress. He didn't consider it a shameful profession. He was more concerned that Adriana would be hit on by guys. And just this Michael imagined, as at the same moment he felt a rising wave of jealousy. Meanwhile, Adriana, as soon as her husband left for work, also got up and started to pack. The nanny looked at the young woman with surprise, as she had long been accustomed to the fact that she got up around 12 noon and then washed herself in front of the mirror and went about her business, and returns closer to her husband's arrival. Michael could not concentrate on his work. He kept going back to his conversation with his wife yesterday. And then the man called Adriana, but she did not answer. Michael tried several more times to call his wife, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. On that day, he left work earlier than usual, and coming home, found that Adriana was not there. The landlord turned to the nanny, asking her where his spouse had gone. Kathy discreetly replied that Adriana did not report to her. Michael, in a shower of features, sat down in a chair and thought about it. And at the same moment, he heard the front door being rejected. The man jumped up and with a quick step followed into the hallway. He saw his wife smiling, who, seeing him, stopped smiling and only spoke softly. "You're supposed to be at work, aren't you? Where have you been?" The husband answered the question with a question. "You said I had to look for a job. That's what I've been doing. Let's forget about yesterday. We had a fight the first day you arrived. I missed you so much while you were away. You don't have to look for a job. I'd rather see you greet me than wait for you to come back, tired after a day's work." The man spoke softly and looked at his wife, waiting to see what she would say. But Adriana said nothing in response. From that day on, Adriana completely ignored her spouse. She behaved with him in an aloof manner. She went to bed defiantly in the children's room. Michael tolerated this attitude to himself for several days. He thought that his wife was just showing him her character. This continued for another week, and the man could not stand it. He decided to talk to his wife. He turned to his wife and said that he did not want to live with the woman he loved, as with a neighbor on the landing. Adriana looked indifferently at her husband and said, "I live with you. What else do you want? I have already explained my position to you. You sit at home doing practically nothing. You don't do anything with your child. Kathy told me everything. As soon as I go to work, you disappear after a while. What is it? Why don't you tell me where you disappear to? I tend to think you're having an affair. Tell me if that's the case. I don't understand you. Can I have my own space? Or do you think I have to report to you every time I do something? I'm not your personal item." "Okay, you're right about not being my property, but I need to know what my spouse does when I'm at work. Anyway, I'll tell you what. The day after tomorrow, you and I are enrolling our son in daycare, and you'll be dropping him off and picking him up on your own. If you're not happy with that, it's time to talk about divorce, because I can't live like this anymore, and I don't want to." "Divorce? Are you crazy? What about our son?" Adriana asked, puzzled. "Did you remember about the degree? Congratulations. I've told you everything. And then you can draw your own conclusions." After this conversation about divorce, Adriana changed. She became more affectionate towards her husband, and Michael thought it was necessary to talk about it earlier. The man hoped that now in their family again will be harmony and love. And in fact, for a couple of months, the spouses lived in Idle. And then Adriana asked her husband to buy a car. Michael was surprised by the request and asked why his wife needs another car when they have a foreign car. And also the head of the family added that he was always ready to take his wife wherever she needed to go. Adriana said that she wants to be a complete mistress of transportation and not to turn to her husband to take her to one place or another. Michael's mother found out about this conversation. Her son had told her about it himself. Betty became suspicious about Adriana's request and directly asked who, "Why do you need a car? You stay at home and you have nowhere to go. I understand if you were working, then it would be different. My son has already told you everything. I didn't expect anything else from him. What can I say to you? I just wish my husband would give me a gift like this, especially since he's already doing well with his business. It's dark. That's you, Adriana. You and I don't have a very good relationship, but my son loves you, and I wouldn't want you to hurt him. I'm not gonna hurt him, Michael. And if you love your son so much, help me get him to buy me a car. Maybe you and I will have a warmer relationship after that, my daughter-in-law said, and smiled amiably. I will think about your suggestion, Betty replied. After this conversation, 7 months passed, and Michael purchased his wife's automobile. His parents helped him buy the vehicle. Adriana, by this time, had already completed her driver's training. If Adriana was happy that she became the owner of the car, Michael repeatedly regretted that he had gone to the trouble of his wife and bought the car. And the thing was that since the moment when the wife had a foreign car, Adriana always disappeared somewhere. And then another event happened in the family, which unpleasantly surprised Michael. The man went to the chest of drawers, where the cash was stored, and found that there is no 1/3 of the amount. The head of the family was shocked, because without a joint agreement the money was not taken. Michael immediately called his spouse, but she did not answer. The man was dejected, but looked out the window. He did not know what to think in this situation. He was distracted from his thoughts by a phone call. Michael thought it was his spouse calling, but it turned out to be his mother, who spoke indignantly. I understand what's going on in your family, but your son should live with you, not with his grandparents. Adriana said that Liam would stay with us for a couple of days, but the boy has been with us for a week, and none of you have bothered to check on him. Wait, Adriana's mom told me that you yourself expressed a desire to take your grandson for 10 days. That's exactly what didn't happen. Your wife called me a week ago and asked me to take a couple days because she had some business to take care of. I said yes, and instead of 2 days, it's been a week, and there was no answer from you. I'll come and get Liam, said Michael, who was unpleasantly surprised for the second time that his wife had deceived him. Soon the young man was sitting at his parents' house. Betty looked at the frown on her son's face and purely intuitively felt that he was not doing well. The woman touched Michael's hand and affectionately inquired how he was doing. The boy looked at his mother and said nothing. Betty sat down next to her son and said, "You come on, don't get dark. Tell me what happened. I can see you're not calm. Things with Adriana and I are getting worse and worse. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I would do anything for her, and what I see in return is total indifference. Tell me why she lied to me about the degree. Adriana told me you wanted to take care of the baby, but she actually asked you to do it. And then there's the missing money. You've been robbed," Betty exclaimed. "No, Adriana took the money and didn't even tell me. The money is to buy goods for a trip I'm going on soon," the son replied. Betty wanted to continue the conversation, but Michael politely dismissed the conversation and then dressed his son and said goodbye to his mother and soon drove home with Liam. On the way, he called his spouse several more times, but Adriana did not answer. Adriana came home at the beginning of the 11th evening and, as if nothing had happened, asked her husband about his work. Michael was furious with his wife's behavior, and as soon as the wife went to the kitchen, he rushed after her and, barely restraining anger, said, "Maybe you can explain how I should understand you. You took money from the house secretly. You flashed Liam at your mother, and you're not answering your phone. I was very busy, so I couldn't answer. As for the money, I needed it for business. I decided to take an eyelash extension course. I didn't tell you about it. Otherwise, you would have started talking me out of it like you always do. That's why I took the money to pay for the course. I hope I've answered all your questions. Why would I talk you out of it? I'm all for you having something you love to do. But you know, it doesn't work that way. After all, you're my wife, and I need to know what's going on in your life. Don't you notice that you're living your own separate life away from me and my son? Where there's no place. You come home whenever you want. I'll tell you more about the last time you cooked dinner. Lately, I've been doing it. I'm sorry, but now I'm telling you everything, because I've already spoken my mind. I feel better now. And now, I'll speak out. I don't have the heart to cook, wash, clean. I just want to live and enjoy life. I've had enough of cooking in the village, scrubbing floors, planting seedlings. Now I want to live for myself. And I only signed up for the course so your mother would stop running my nose in it that I'm a freeloader. And once again, you need your wife to do the housework. Then this problem can be very easily solved. A lot of people hire housekeepers. Why? And you and I can't do the same. This way we will solve the problem in one fell swoop. I won't have to do things I don't want to do. And you won't have to cook dinner yourself. What do you think of my offer? I'm starting to think you don't really need a family. We're not hiring a housekeeper. I'm suggesting that you rethink the way you look at life. If you don't listen to me, our marriage will eventually start to fall apart. Realize that I'm not an iron man, and my patience can break too. Adriana, after the last phrase of his wife, came up to him and gently hugged him, and then said that she would try to change. Michael was surprised by his wife's words. He did not expect her to change overnight. After all, only a few minutes ago, she was defending her point of view, and now suddenly she behaved differently. Meanwhile, Adriana stood on her toes and quietly suggested that we make love. Michael was completely confused after this phrase, because recently he and his wife had rarely had intimacy. The man did not bother himself with thoughts, but took Adriana in his arms and carried her to the couch. The next morning, Michael woke up and saw that his wife was not there. He was surprised, got up and went to the kitchen, where he saw that his wife was making coffee. The head of the family looked at the election with surprise. After all, the girl had never done this before. The man said in amazement, "You scare me. What's wrong with you? I told you that I will try to become an exemplary and caring wife. You didn't. I'm glad you did. I hope that it will always be so," replied the husband, and tenderly kissed the chosen one. A few days passed, and Michael was about to go to another city to pick up the goods. How did Liam fall ill? The trip had to be postponed because Adriana was traveling to an eyelash extension course. Michael wanted to ask his mother to take care of the baby initially, but Betty caught a cold herself. Liam recovered only 2 weeks later. During this time, Adriana only traveled for her training and immediately returned home. It seemed to Michael then that their married life with his wife was back to the way it was when they were a happy couple. As Liam recovered, he was put back into daycare. Michael intended to go on a business trip. Then his mother called him and told him that she wanted to go to a sanatorium and offered to take her grandson with her so that he could breathe the sea air. Michael told the news to his wife, and she was delighted with the news. Adriana told her husband that it would be wonderful if the son will be at the resort with his grandmother. She also added that sea air would be good for Liam after his illness. Michael agreed with his wife and informed his mother about it. And soon Betty went to the sea with her grandson. And then, after a few more days, Michael left for the goods. The man always left for 4 days, and Adriana knew about it. But this time, Michael arrived a little earlier. He wanted to surprise his wife. On the way home, the man stopped at a flower store and bought a luxurious bouquet of white roses. Michael imagined how happy his wife would be with the flowers, as he had not bought them for a long time. It seemed to the man that the bouquet would not be enough to make his beloved happy. Therefore, sat in a jewelry store and bought a silver brooch in the form of a soaring swallow. And Michael quietly opens the front door to his apartment with his key. Anticipating a joyful meeting, the man quietly passes into the hallway as he hears an unfamiliar male voice, which says, "Be patient, kitten, a little more, and soon this show will be over, and you and I will live happily ever after." The landlord stopped in bewilderment. He felt the rage beginning to flare up inside him. Michael threw the flowers aside and hurried into the room, where he saw his exact copy in bed with his wife. The man was dumbfounded, and then the stranger, seeing the entrant, said with a smile, "I told you that soon the play will be over. True, it's not quite the ending I had planned. But since everything went like this, Then maybe it's true that fate loves you more than me. What brother? Who are you? You have a short memory, I see. You were born just a few minutes before me. The stranger grinned. Adriana looked at her husband with a sneering gaze, waiting for his reaction. Michael felt his wife's gaze and looked at her. The woman didn't take her eyes away. Only a sarcastic grin appeared on her face. The owner of the apartment could not believe that his beloved was currently in bed with a man who looked like 2 drops of water like himself. And only Michael was about to say to his spouse, Barbs. As the stranger spoke again, I think we can save the marital squabbles for later. Now, brother, let's get down to family business. You're not my brother. And get the hell out of my apartment right now. And don't tell me what to do now or later. You and I are never gonna get anywhere. Did you really forget you have a twin brother? Michael looked at the stranger, and somewhere in his subconscious mind, there was a memory of him hugging a boy who looked like him in his early childhood, and they were crying and saying something to each other. However, this memory was so distant that Michael thought it was his fantasy rather than a real piece of memory. Meanwhile, the doppelganger stood up, pulled on his jeans, and then sat down on the couch and asked Adriana to make coffee. The woman unquestioningly obeyed this request. Michael, this action angered, because his wife fulfills the requests of a stranger to him. The owner of the apartment looked with hatred at the guests, and again with a lordly tone suggested to him to clean up. The stranger laughed in response and said, "Don't talk, brother. I'm sorry that your husband seduced you, but I don't think she ever loved you. Judging by what she told me about you, I take it you don't remember me at all." "Well, I don't, although I can understand it, because you've lived well all this time. Your parents spoiled you. You're their only son. I, on the other hand, had a very different fate. Unlike you, I've lived all these years dreaming of finding your parents and making them suffer, and you too. I even came up with a plan, but you got back from your trip early. What are you talking about? You're gonna explain this now, or I'm calling the police. I can't figure out who you are. I don't deny that you look exactly like me. But there are many paradoxes in life, that there are people who are doppelgangers. But that doesn't mean you're my brother." That's when Adriana and Michael walked in. "Shut up." The young woman brought on a tray Turk-flavored coffee and coffee sets. The girl stirred the drink into a cup and invited everyone to the coffee table. Adriana first of all served a cup of coffee to the guest, and then to her husband. While doing so, she told her husband not to hesitate. "This man is actually your brother. His name is William. And I can prove it to you. I didn't really believe it at first either. He looks like you, and he looks like you. But he told me everything. All I can say is that William looks like you on the surface. He's a real man you want to be around. And how long have you been in a relationship with this man? How long have I been re-wearing my goat horns?" Trying not to raise his tone, Michael said, "After I got back from the resort. That's where I met William. That's why I didn't want you to go there with Liam, because it would have been awkward for me to meet William. You said you could provide proof. May I ask how you're going to do that?" Michael said. The young woman easily got up from her chair and without a word went into the hallway. She soon returned with a handbag. She took out a piece of paper and handed it to her husband. Michael took the sheet, unfolded it, and silently began to read. After a few minutes, the landlord looked at William in bewilderment and spoke a little audibly. "How can this be? It is impossible. What is it that surprises you so much?" "The fact that you have a twin brother," William asked. "Exactly. Why weren't you with me all this time?" Michael answered the question with a question. "That's not for me to ask, but for your parents. But at least you trust this document." Adriana did the parentage test. By the way, I'd like to say she took your money for the test, not for the eyelash extensions course. I gotta hand it to her. "Well, you've got a pretty smart girl," the guest said. "I'm not interested in information about my wife now, but you. Where have you been all this time? Why didn't you and I live in the same family?" Frowned Michael, who at the moment was in a state of shock. He had already reread the parentage test several times and scrutinized the signatures and seals on the document. William was silent for a while, and then spoke. The man told his brother that they had been born into the family forever. Drunkenness of their parents and guardianship authorities deprived their mother and father of parental rights, and then at the age of 3 years, the twins were taken to an orphanage, where they were brought up together until a certain point, namely almost to the age of 6. After that, a couple came to the orphanage and wanted to adopt the boys, but for some unknown reasons the adults took only one child, and the second one was not taken. Thus, Michael was raised by foster parents, and William remained in the orphanage. The landlord listened attentively to his brother. As soon as the interlocutor was silent, Michael shook his head without understanding, and then said, "I am not very strong in the laws of adoption, but I know for sure that it is not allowed to separate brothers or sisters. If my parents adopted me, they should have adopted you. That's a question you'll ask your mother or father, but not me. Your parents promised me they'd take me too. And for years I waited for them, but in vain. I'll never forget how we said goodbye and cried like girls and promised each other that soon we would live together again. Your parents promised me they'd come back for me. I asked your mother that question when I was grown up and out of the orphanage. Don't look at me like that. Yes, I was able to find your family, and I wanted a good reunion with my brother. But your mother forbade me to come within a stone's throw of you. That's when I went crazy. That you had everything like a normal kid, but I didn't. And you haven't even thought about me in all these years. Wait, take your time. I had vague visions that you were cuddling with a boy who looked like me. And then I remember asking my mom when we were picking up my brother. And then she said you were dead. And as time went on, I slowly forgot all about it. I mean, how old was I then? You know very well. And then after a while I asked my parents about you again. But my mom told me that I once had a dream about my brother, but I didn't really have anyone. So, I'm an only child, and I really thought I was. And now it turns out my mom lied to me. Stunned, Michael said, "I guess that's just the way it is. I told you that. These are questions you should be asking your mother, not me." The man said carelessly, "I will. But tell me why, when you left the orphanage, you met only with my mother and did not try to find me." That's a different story. I was going to do it, but I want to tell you right away that unlike you, I grew up not a boy, and quite a hooligan. I was registered in the children's police room, and when I left the orphanage, I visited your mother, where I was turned away. Then I wanted to see you, but I had important things to do at the time. Anyway, a bunch of us robbed a big store, and I was caught on CCTV. I was soon picked up, and I got time out of jail. I tried to contact your mother on the phone, but she soon changed her number. As soon as I got out of prison, I literally only got out for a few days before I got another sentence for hooliganism. Released early for good behavior, and I decided to take a little rest before thinking about how to continue to live. So I went to a resort where I met your wife. It was a real shock to me at the time. What kind of things can happen in life? A confluence of circumstances. I'm making love to my wife and my own brother. It was Adriana who told me I looked like her husband. And then she showed me your picture. I just asked her what her mother-in-law's name was. Adriana said Betty, and I had no more doubts. I thought it was just a coincidence, but when I heard your mother's name, I realized that it was your spouse who was really next to me in my arms. That's when I thought it was time for retribution. And after Adriana started talking about you, I realized that she would help me with everything. What did you intend to do next? Michael said quietly, "To become you." Adriana put your picture on my phone, and she and I went to the barbershop to get my hair cut. Just like you. And within an hour, I looked like you beyond recognition. And then Adriana told me how you acted, how you talked to people. You know, she was just bringing me up to speed. What was supposed to happen to me? Michael, who had already guessed the answer, barely squeezed out a question. Do you understand? You were supposed to disappear, just disappear. You've had a good life already. Now it's my turn. Everything has to be fair. Don't you think so?" William said nonchalantly. "Would you take the life of your own brother?" Michael said hoarsely, "I've been thinking about this for a long time. You've done nothing wrong to me, you see. But I am offended that you let yourself live, forgetting about me. And I haven't been able to forget about you all these years. How many childhood tears did I shed at the orphanage, being separated from my brother? How many times did I try to escape to find you? All that pain was stored in my heart for years. And one day that pain turned into hate. And about taking your life. No, I couldn't do that. But there are special people for that. For a good price. There was a man, and he's gone. And if I were you, I'd do you justice with your privilege. It's very simple, brother." Michael was glumly silent. He had not expected such a simple explanation from a relative. It was also unbearable for the man. It hurt that his wife, who had shared his bed with him, and had been lying without remorse, knew about all this. There was silence in the room. Each of the three was thinking about something else. Michael was the first to speak. He had just realized that his unexpected arrival had ruined the plans of the love couple. The man turned to his brother. "Everything you planned has already gone to tatters. Your next move. You're not going to take my life with your own hands, are you? I already know what you're planning, so I can do something to protect myself." "That's a good question, and I've been expecting it from you. It all depends on how you handle the situation. I've done quite well for myself. I've spent time learning your so-called habits, and it's easy for me to become you. You know exactly what I'm getting at, don't you? I might add that Adriana and I have even made an experiment in this matter. She and I went to your mother's house together. And guess what, Betty? No, she cured me of you. In short, your fate depends on you. I have nothing more to say on the subject. I understand you perfectly. Give me a few days. I have some things to sort out." Michael said thoughtfully, "No problem. But if you want to go to the police for help, that would be your folly. Just don't forget you've got a little boy. Think of him. I don't need the police, and let's not make threats. Don't forget that the child is not only my son, but Adriana's too. And she's a mother after all. And I don't think she cares about the baby." The landlord spoke harshly. Soon William left, and the couple was alone. Adriana nonchalantly collected the cups on the tray and went into the kitchen. Michael followed. He stood and silently watched his wife wash the dishes, and as soon as there was an attempt, the last cup, he asked her to sit down for a conversation. The young woman shrugged indifferently, but complied with the request. The man felt that at the moment he wanted to hit the chosen one in the face, but he restrained this urge. Michael sat down opposite Adriana and glanced at her. The girl coolly endured the gaze, and after a few minutes said, "If you are going to make me regret something or make me feel remorseful, you're wasting your time. I didn't marry you out of great love. I just wanted to get on with my life, because I had no desire to go back to the village. You're not my kind of man, to put it mildly. You're basically a Rocklin. But your brother is a real man, a man you can go to the ends of the earth with. And I'm glad that show's over. How long did you intend to wait with William before you executed your plan? He told me I needed you to open a third outlet. You told me that yourself. And naturally, I told William about it. So we would have continued to play our roles for about another month," I said carelessly. "Did you think of Liam when you planned all this together with my brother? Why do you ask about the child right away? Would you have hired a housekeeper and paid her extra to look after Liam?" Adriana replied, "What kind of a scary person are you? I thought William was a scoundrel, but he's not. My brother's just a bitter man about life, and I understand him in some ways. But you, it turns out, I don't know you at all, and I'm amazed at myself at the moment. How I could love you and not recognize your petty soul. You'd do anything for money, even sleep with someone you don't love. I asked you not to appeal to my conscience. It won't work. You're not quite right about the money. Your brother doesn't have much, but I'm with him because I care about him. and I care about him a lot. Unlike you," the wife said pompously. "Living here alone, I'll be staying with my parents for a while. And a big request in my absence, do not organize a brothel here. You and William will have that opportunity soon. I promise you that." After this phrase, Michael hastily packed up and left the apartment. At the moment, the man wanted to talk to his parents alone. He wanted to know everything right now. He walked out of the entryway and got into his car and headed to his father's house. As soon as Michael arrived at his dad's house, he asked Benjamin without any preamble about the orphanage and his twin brother. The elderly man nervously grabbed his heart and began to slowly settle to the floor. Michael fearfully helped his father down and immediately called an ambulance. Benjamin was urgently hospitalized with a heart attack. Michael afterward called his mother and asked her to come home immediately. He would not ask his mother anything about his brother over the phone. The man only reported that he'd been admitted to the hospital. Betty promised that she would be on her way home today. Michael was anxiously awaiting his mother's return. He had a lot of questions for his mom. He also didn't know how to start a conversation with his foster mom. The man was worried that Betty would react similarly to his question about the twin brothers and end up in a hospital bed as well. The next day, Betty arrived. She left Michael Liam and herself went to visit her spouse at once in the hospital. Upon her return, the woman was depressed. Michael asked his mother how his father was doing with his health. Betty looked sadly at her son and said that today was much better than yesterday. And then the woman sat down tiredly in a chair and quietly said, "I know you want to know a lot of things from me. My father told me I understand that your twin brother found you and had time to tell you a lot of things. Yes, that's how I got the story from him. Now I'd like to hear it from you. How could it be that one boy was taken and the other left in an orphanage? Son, you just listen to everything. And then I don't blame my father for anything. He had nothing to do with it. Daddy did what I told him to do. You know how much your father loves me and you. He'd drop his pants just to be happy with you and me. Your father and I met when we were still in the first year of study at the Institute and immediately fell in love and soon married. We lived soul to soul, as well as now. Time flew by, and I could not get pregnant. Initially, we were even happy about this circumstance, as we wanted to get an education first, and then to have heirs. But we graduated from the Institute, and I could not get pregnant. A year passed, then another one. And that's when I rang the bells and started pestering polyclinics. I was examined and was told a terrible verdict that I was infertile. It was a terrible shock for me. And I then suggested to my husband to divorce me, as I knew that he wanted to have children. Ethan then called me crazy and said that means we will live for ourselves, and he would not divorce me, as he loves me very much. It's been a few more years. Your father and I went into business, and soon we were doing well. We could live and be happy, but I still felt like an unhappy woman. I felt like some kind of freak. Your father saw perfectly well that I resented myself for not being able to have children, and that's when he offered to take a baby from the orphanage. Initially, I did not even want to hear about it, because I did not believe that I could love someone else's child. However, my husband unobtrusively brought it up once in a while, and at some point I gave in to him, and we went to the orphanage. That's where I noticed you right away. You were standing on the sidelines looking out the window. You had a beaming smile at that moment. I pointed you out to my husband and told him that you would be my son. Ethan smiled and nodded affirmatively. At that moment, the teacher came up to us and told us that you were not alone, but that you had a twin brother. My husband and I looked at each other because we wanted only one baby, not two. And your brother came up to you at that moment. I looked at my husband again and suggested that he take both of them at once. The teacher heard this and asked us to go out into the hallway to talk. As soon as we left the playroom, the child care worker said that your brother has heart problems and anything can happen. And at that moment I said that we don't need a sick child and we will come another time to look for another child. We left. I was in a state of prostration for days. I kept dreaming about you and your smile. I didn't know what to do. That's when I suggested to your father that you be the only boy he could raise. My husband refused at first. He said we couldn't separate the twins, but I was able to convince him that a sick child is too much responsibility, so the second baby would be. It's better if he stays under the supervision of the orphanage staff. And so, before long, we had you. Michael sat in silence after his mother's story. He looked away and thought about something. Betty, at the same time, looked at her son expectantly, waiting for Michael to speak. After a few minutes had passed, the man looked at his mother and quietly said, "How could the orphanage give you only one twin and leave the other one behind? Son, money makes everything these days. Take my word for it. And in our case, we had a lot of financial help. I know it sounds horrible, but I was afraid to take responsibility for that boy." "That's funny. You're speaking for that boy. He's not a boy. He's my own brother, the one you separated me from back in the day. And that boy grew up and became angry at the world, not only at you, but at me. And all these years he's been waiting for me to find him or for you to take him away. Do you have any idea what it was like for me to hear him say that? William grew up hurting and hating me, although it's not my fault. And now he's plotting revenge with my wife. You heard right, my wife Adriana. And they've known each other for quite some time. Were you right? She didn't love me and only married me to live an easy life. But that's not the point now. It's why you lied to me about William being dead. Why did you make me believe it? What was the purpose of it? Son, I'll tell you again, I was afraid of the responsibility of raising a sick child. And about William dying, I thought that since you were separated as children, you'd better forget about him. So I said so. I didn't think that boy would remember you all the time. You were still at an age when childhood memories fade with tears in your eyes, Betty said. As you see, William has those memories. Have they not faded? What did you say? And one more question. Why didn't you report the time when your brother came to see you as a senior in the orphanage? Maybe he should have reached out and apologized to you then. And he probably would have had a very different fate. Muffled, Michael spoke up. I couldn't do that because I was afraid you wouldn't understand me. So I asked William never to come near you. I threatened the boy that if he dared to come near you, I would make his life unbearable. Realize that kids who are raised in an orphanage, they all go down a crooked path. And I was afraid that my brother would have a detrimental effect on you. Sobbing, the woman replied, You ruined his life, just like you ruined mine. Now I understand why you changed your number. It was because William called you from prison and asked for financial support. And you decided to kill two birds with one stone. So you changed your phone number and you got rid of all thoughts of my brother. I never expected that from you. I can't deny I'm grateful to you for raising him. But I can't forgive you for what you did. I can't tell you anything now because I have to decide what I need to do about my brother. At the moment, I will rent an apartment and live with the wall on my own, as I need to put my thoughts in order. Say hello to your father and let him get well. I can't visit him yet either. After these words, Michael left his parents' apartment with his son, leaving his mother there sobbing. The man actually wanted to be alone now to calm his nerves. Michael got into the car with the child and winked, spelled out that they would be single for a while. The same day, the man rented a studio apartment and in the evening drove to his place, where he saw his spouse sweetly chatting with his brother on the phone. The woman looked indifferently at the entering husband, who was holding his son in his arms. Liam, seeing his mother, reached for her. Adriana reluctantly finished talking to her lover. She picked up the baby. Michael, without further ado, picked up the travel bag, and he started to pack the baby's things and his own at the same time. Adriana, at this moment, indifferently watched her husband's actions. As soon as Michael collected the bag, he called Liam to him. The baby can hardly pronounce words. Asked, and Mom will go with us. No, son, your mom has better things to do. Let's not distract her. You saw how Mommy talked to a client who will be extending eyelashes. The head of the family grinned. Adriana smirked in response, and softly spoke. "Very funny. Let's get the baby involved in this whole thing. I think you did it yourself when you put your personal life on the line. You can't even talk to your son now. You want us to leave so you can keep talking to William. I want to tell you that you have nothing sacred and no maternal feelings for your son either. If that's all, close the door on the other side, because I have no desire to listen to your moralizing." "Not at all." Michael wanted to say something. Then he waved his hand, took Liam's hand, and left the apartment. The man tried not to think about his wife now, so he began to tell his son funny stories. The boy smiled in response, and when his father showed him a cow, the child laughed. Michael, on the way to the rented apartment, stopped by the store and bought dumplings, and soon father and son were already having dinner sitting in the kitchen. Liam tried to tell his father how he and his grandmother spent their leisure time at the resort. Michael tried to listen attentively to the child, but he did not succeed, as his thoughts hovered about his brother. After a while, the man put the pile to bed and himself thought about what he should do next. He didn't think about the fact that his brother could hurt him. He just didn't believe it. Michael wanted to make William thaw in his heart and stop hating the whole world. The man was only able to fall asleep when he awoke to the sound of Liam moving through him. Michael glanced at the clock. It was 9 o'clock. The man shook his head unsatisfactorily to work. He was late, and then he looked at his son, winked at him, and informed him, "Today, dear friend, we do worldly things and then get into work mode. By the way, I want to inform you that for breakfast we will have dumplings again, and we will have lunch in a cafe. And for dinner, can Daddy make you something? What do you want to eat?" "Fried potatoes," says the boy. "You got it. I'll make fried potatoes tonight. Now, let's eat quickly, and then to the kindergarten, so that I can take you there tomorrow, and then to my work, so that everything is clear on the spot after the cafe and shopping for provisions. After all, potatoes should be cooked from potatoes," father said with a laugh. The next day, Michael took Liam to the kindergarten and went to work. Soon his mother called him and asked him tearfully to come and see his father. Betty said that she had told Papa about their conversation, and Benjamin became very nervous and worse. Michael, holding back his irritation, said, "Mom, why did you do that? You know perfectly well that Father mustn't be disturbed now, and you're just adding fuel to the fire. Do you really want your father to die early?" "Son, what are you talking about? I love your father, and I love you too. It's just that Ethan knows me well, and he got the whole conversation out of me word for word." Crying, Betty replied, "Okay, Mom, calm down. I'll be at Dad's in an hour. Just please, can we talk to him alone? It'll be easier for me without you, and Dad too. I promise I won't worry him any more soon." Michael was already sitting at his father's side in the chair beside the bed. The young man looked at his father and thought, how can a man get so old in a couple days? Benjamin put his hand on his son's arm and patted it lightly, then said softly, "You've had to hear a lot from your mother. I understand how hard it is for you. But believe me, it's hard for a mother right now, twice as hard. I'm very worried about her. She's the one who looks so strong, and in reality, a weak woman, not pushing her away. You can see now that I'm not a very good protector. My only hope is for you to believe in what we did to her. It's a great offense and God will punish us yet, but I would very much like to take the punishment myself, and I'd like to protect your mother from it, because I love that woman so much. Daddy, I'm having a hard time. I promised my mother I wouldn't worry you, but I don't want to deceive you either. For the time being, I need to cool down, and only then I can be myself. See, I'm being honest with you about everything. Man to man, I need to figure things out for myself, and most importantly, I need to get along with William. He's my brother. Well done, son. You said the right thing about your brother, and I believe you can do it. And you know, you've made me feel better. And about Adriana, get her out of your head. She's not worthy to be your wife. You'll find happiness on your way. I only have one request. Don't leave Adriana the baby. She doesn't need lime. Yes, I think you know that yourself. I know it as well as I do, Father. And you get some tea and get well soon. Your grandson's been asking about you. I'll visit my mother one of these days. How are things at home? The son said, and gave his father a friendly pat on the arm. Leaving the room, Michael suddenly felt relieved to talk to his father. He himself did not realize why it had happened. The man drove to work after the hospital, then picked up his son from daycare. And when he arrived at the rented apartment, he thought about it. He watched the child playing with a steam train and mentally envied the kid that he did not have such problems as he had. Michael was distracted from his thoughts by a phone call. He looked at the display and saw an unfamiliar number. The man answered and immediately recognized the voice of his brother, who asked when they would meet. Michael, without hesitation, replied that the day after tomorrow. William clarified exactly where the meeting would take place, and the interlocutor answered him. I think it will be on neutral territory. You know, I have long promised my son to go to the zoo. There we'll see the animals and talk. How's that sound? By the way, don't forget to bring Adriana along. She's not the last hero in this story, and she's not the only one involved. Who are you going to be with? Are you going to bring a support group in the form of police officers? William said with a grin. You're wrong. I'll be with my son. I want to tell you one thing on the phone, that I'm going to meet you to bury the hatchet. Think about it at your leisure. The next day, Michael, as promised to his father, stopped by his mother, who, seeing her son, immediately threw herself on her knees in front of him. The old woman, sobbing, asked for forgiveness. Michael helped Betty to her feet and asked her to calm down. Your mother's sobs were all your mother said. Forgive me, I'm so sorry for you. Mom, you're saying it wrong. Your guilt is more for my brother. You should apologize to him first. But I think you might get the chance, but it'll depend on William. I'm going to talk to him tomorrow. What are you going to talk about? You don't know anything about each other. Betty said, puzzled. That will be the topic of conversation. William will talk about himself, and I'll talk about me. He and I need to make up for lost time. You just hang in there, and more than once. At the appointed hour, Michael stood at the zoo gate, holding his son's hand. He was waiting for his brother and his wife, and soon Adriana's car stopped near them. William got out of it. The men said hello, and after a few minutes Adriana came up to them and parked the car not far away. The three adults and the child followed past the zoo gate, and Michael was the first to speak. Brother, I know you're upset with me, but you realize it wasn't my fault. I've talked to my mother and father about it. They honestly admitted that they were young, not then, and were afraid to take you from the orphanage because you had a heart condition. But that's a separate story. That's not what we're talking about right now. Don't pull the cat out of the bag and start with the main point. I want the main point. I have no desire to go and look at animals. William said with a sneer. I'll get to the point. You're angry that fate has dealt you everything. But you are not right about that. A man is the blacksmith of his own happiness. For example, have you done nothing to achieve anything in life? Said the calm Michael. Stop. Are you trying to lecture me now? Roughly interrupted William brother. Absolutely not. I have a proposition for you. Well, look, I have 2 outlets, and they're pretty well promoted. And I'm giving them to you. It's all gonna be done legally and legally. Adriana has a car, so you'll keep the car. Now we have to figure out a place to live. I have a 1-bedroom apartment. I could leave it to you. But Liam and I need a place to live too. There's a little problem here, and I don't know what to do. I'd like to hear your options. What's there to decide? Adriana intervened in the conversation. The men turned to the woman, who continued to say, Michael, you can move to your parents because they have a 3-bedroom, so you have somewhere to live. Adriana, I'm used to living on my own. I can only offer to exchange the 2-bedroom for 2 1-bedrooms. I'll make the extra payment myself. Michael said, there's no need for an exchange. Adriana exclaimed businesslike. The brothers looked at the young woman again. She, in turn, shrugged her shoulders and spoke. William has a one-bedroom apartment that the state gave him when he came out of the orphanage. But it's in the middle of nowhere. So Michael can have it, and we'll stay in the two-bedroom that you've officially registered to me. How's that sound? Well, you're a woman of fire, said William admiringly. And then he added, you've got a super brain in your head. I picked the right woman for me. Well, let it be as you decide. We'll take care of all this business in a couple days. And now I'm turning to you, William. Can you burn the anger out of your heart and forgive my parents? Believe me, they're so sorry for what they've done, and they're having a hard time. My dad is in the hospital having a seizure because of this whole situation. I know your parents will be on their knees begging you for what they did. I wish you could find the strength to forgive them. I am ready to take off the last of my pants and give them to you, just to thaw your heart. And I say that with a pure heart. How easy is it for you? You know how they say, a little money and all the years are gone. I can't do that, unfortunately. And what do you want me to do in this case? William said in a hoarse voice with excitement. I didn't say it was easy, but you see, if you and I have already met, perhaps this is our chance to be brotherly friends, not sworn enemies. Don't you realize that anyone can make a mistake, but you can't just go straight to the gutter? Yes, my parents made a terrible mistake, but they regret it. Just give them a chance. I can't promise you anything. I need time, said the interlocutor glumly. Michael smiled at the same time. William looked at the twin with surprise and said, what did I say that was so funny? Nothing, really. Nothing. It's just that you're saying exactly what I said to your father the other day, that you need time. You have almost all the same words and the same intonation as me. Apparently, Adriana has done a good job of molding you into me. His brother smiled. The adults laughed, and Michael thought that William might be able to get over himself and forgive Betty and Benjamin about Adriana after a while. Michael had a very different thought. In his opinion, this one had. The girl would always prioritize money over feelings. He even at the same moment realized that he had completely cooled Adriana, and it made him feel even better. In the evening of the same day, Michael went to his father and told him everything. Papa shook hands with his son and said that he had done the right thing and asked him to visit his mother. Michael did not resist and was happy to do so. After the hospital, he went with his son to his mother's house, where he also told her about the reconciliation with his brother. Betty, hearing the news, said the son hugged his mother and softly said no need to cry anymore. Everything is in the past. Now only time is needed for everyone to calm down a bit. You, mother, have often told me that time heals. So it should happen in our case. The important thing is to believe it. You can't go back to the past. You have to live in the present. The important thing is that William doesn't go down the wrong road, because he's had a lot of things in his life he shouldn't have. Son, I will obey your brother, and it's up to him to forgive me or not. But know, my dear, that I love you more than life, and I will try to love William as well. I know that God will punish me and my father. Ethan told me so. But your father has already been punished by the Almighty because he had a heart attack. It's my turn next, and I'll take it with dignity. Don't be silly. It's just that Daddy has a weak heart, and no one has punished him. And no one will punish you. We'll be all right. Now feed me and my grandson. We're hungry as wolves. I suggest even in honor of this to run to the store and buy a huge cake to celebrate such an event. It's not every day that brothers reconcile after all these years apart. And you know, Mom, William does look just like me. The man laughed, and Betty laughed too. Liam looked at the grown-ups uncomprehendingly and laughed merrily too. Subscribe and click the bell.
The head was telling. Nancy opened her eyes and for a long time could not realize where she was. Scant sunlight streamed into the room through the boarded-up window, and it smelled damp and musty. Nancy tried to get up, but found her arms and legs tightly bound with ropes, cutting painfully into her skin. God, what's happening? The girl thought. Where am I? The last thing she remembered was her and her husband celebrating their anniversary and drinking wine. She was pulled heavily into a dream. Frank carefully carried Nancy to the bedroom. And that was it. And now she was tied up in the middle of nowhere, completely helpless, and with no idea what had happened. And she's wiggling her ears, her lips. Somebody help her. The answer was absolute silence. She could only hear some birds flapping their wings and chickadees somewhere above the ceiling. Nancy tried to free herself from the ropes, but the knots were tight. With each movement, the slings only dug harder into her skin. The girl looked around for something to cut the ropes against. But there was nothing in the room except the filthy mattress she was lying on and a couple of boards in the corner. Shit, Nancy burst out. Slowly, she got up on her knees. She was still wearing the red silk dress she had been wearing yesterday. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her face. Yeah, I must look like a scarecrow. What is this place where Frank is? Looking around the room, the girl realized she was in some kind of abandoned house. The walls were covered in plaster, with brickwork peeking through. There was a thick layer of dust and debris on the floor. The remnants of wallpaper were covered with some kind of fungus. Nancy jerked suddenly, her gaze drawn to the window. It was quite high and boarded up, but through them Nancy saw something that could bring her salvation. Glass. There were large shards sticking out along the edge of the inner frame. The girl decided to get to one of them somehow by climbing to her feet. She tried to jump up to the window opening. The first attempt failed. After the first jump, the girl fell to the floor and hit herself painfully. Her legs were bleeding so badly that it seemed impossible to move. Nancy decided to crawl, overcoming her squeamishness, and the girl began to move slowly across the dirty floor towards the window. When she found herself against the wall, she stood up again. This time her legs proved more docile. The bottom edge of the window was at her eye level. The piece of glass was very close and not even blocked by a board, but there was no way for Nancy to reach it. Her hands were securely fastened behind her back. What to do? The girl muttered to herself, "If I can't get rid of the ropes soon, I'm finished." The one who brought me here, apparently, was guided by bad motives. I wasn't just left here to die, so he'll be here soon. I hope she took another good look around the room on her knees. She got into the corner with the boards. There were a couple big rusty nails sticking out of one of them. That's it, rejoiced the girl. The edges looked sharp. We should try to break the rope with them. She turned her back to the boards, sat down on the floor, and carefully began to run her bound hands over the protruding points. She cut her wrist painfully a couple times. The nails were rusty. But the least of Nancy's worries right now was possible infection. The rope had become wet with blood, but that didn't stop Nancy. She kept trying, ripping the cord at least a little bit. But the more she tried, the more it only hurt her skin. Suddenly, her attention was distracted by a knocking sound coming from behind the door. Was someone in the house? Fear and hope mixed in her found head. Not realizing who could be behind the door kidnapper or savior, the girl crawled back towards the mattress. She was about to try to scream for help when she suddenly heard a familiar voice. The speaker was behind the wall in the next room, and clearly he was not alone. To her horror, Nancy realized it was a man, her own husband. For a moment, the hope that had flared in her soul that Frank had come to save her crumbled. When she made out what she was saying, "You realize you can't leave her like this." Frank's voice sounded agitated. "Of course I understand," a rather low female voice answered him. Nancy did not recognize her husband's interlocutor. The house is abandoned, of course, but there's always the risk that someone might come here by chance. Not likely, though, especially since the building and the room are locked. Even if someone walks by, they won't break in. But what if that idiot comes to her senses and starts screaming for help? We can't take any chances. In fact, I suggest you get rid of her as soon as possible. I don't want any trouble, and neither do you. What do you suggest? Frank asked the stranger excitedly. That, my dear, is for you to decide. You're the brains of the operation. No, I'm not. Clara, you suggested all this. Oh, look at him talk. No, there's no turning back now. Or are you suggesting we just take her home and pretend it never happened? No, shouted Frank. I'm not stupid. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just consulting with you about a way. You realize that we have to do it cleanly so that no one will ever think it was an accident. And we don't have a lot of time. She'll be awake soon enough. And you're right, we can't keep her here forever. Better, on second thought, the woman replied. I have a couple options, but we need time. At least 24 hours. I got a guy I know who's a medical examiner there. We'll have to put your husband in the car and push him off the cliff. I'll get him to write the report. That's right. So what? It's an accident and everything. He knows. He does this kind of work from time to time. You can trust him. God forbid he flies first. I've got a lot of dirt on him. Clara, are you out of your mind? How do you know people like that? And how do you envision this accident? Very simple. Sleeping pills under the knot on the rocking manor driver's seat and parking lot in it, if you want to set fire to it. That for sure for the results of the autopsy, do not worry. The acquaintances will take care of it. All this is dangerous. After a long pause, Frank replied, and what other option to just leave it here? Let him starve to death. And you immediately reported to the police that the wife is missing? No, that won't do. They will find her sooner or later. And the suspicion? They'll understand me. They'll find something to catch me on. We'll work on the accident too, but we just have to be sure. Then we need to make sure no one can find her yet. Well, I'm getting everything ready. At least tape her mouth shut. Nice place you found, by the way. I didn't find a soul around here. The woman laughed suddenly. It has always been here. It's not mine, of course, but no one but me will enter it. Nancy could not believe that her husband's dialogue with this Clara was not a figment of her imagination. This couple is seriously discussing how to get rid of her. Who the hell is this girl? The girl was puzzled. Obviously, she and Frank have known each other for a while. They're planning this whole thing so calmly. And Frank, is he crazy? What did I do to them that they decided to get rid of me so radically? I've got to do something about this, or they'll put their plans into action. Just now, I'm like a mouse in a cage. The voices died down. Nancy nervously listened to the silence. Her heart pounded wildly, and frantically went over in her head the options to buy time. So this woman had said it would take her a couple days to get everything ready. Frank seemed to agree to that. So I might have time, but they're afraid I'll wake up and call for help. There were footsteps outside the door. Someone was about to enter the room. Suddenly, it hit Nancy. She would have a ghostly chance if she tried to play dead. Since she had fainted last night, her husband must have used some kind of drug to put her to sleep. It was possible to fake poisoning. The girl bit her tongue hard. After a couple seconds, her mouth filled with blood. She lay back on the mattress, tilting her head slightly to the side to let the blood flow from the corner of her mouth. For several years, Nancy had gone to yoga, where she had mastered breathing practices. One of them allowed her to put herself into a kind of trance by slowing her heart rate dramatically. It was going to work. The girl froze and began to take a series of deep breaths. A key turned in the keyhole. Nancy's eyes were closed, so she could not see who had entered the room. All her attention was now focused on her breathing. She took one last deep breath and froze. Thoughts were wandering somewhere outside of her mind. Clara entered the room and saw the girl lying motionless on the mattress. Looking closely at her, the woman noticed blood oozing from the corner of her mouth. No shit. Clara burst out. She walked over to Nancy and listened to her breathing. The girl wasn't breathing. Clara set her lip down. She reached up to her captive's neck and tried to feel for a pulse. It was absent, though the body was still warm. Clara shook Nancy by the shoulders, but she didn't react just fine. Hey, Frank, come here. Frank entered the room with a heavy gait. He looked around and didn't immediately realize why his friend had called him. Honey, Clara said worriedly. I don't even know whether we have one less or more problem now. What do you mean? The man was surprised. Your spouse passed away. See for yourself. Frank's face showed confusion. How could she die? Are you sure? Yes. Clara was quick to assure him. Not breathing. No pulse, blood coming out of her mouth. What did you give her last night? I gave her a horse dose before the sleeping pills. It shouldn't have been. Your fiancé must have some kind of individual intolerance. But if you remember, I don't remember anything, Frank argued resentfully. He looked at Nancy's breathless body. For a moment, it seemed to him that she had returned. He pushed Clara away and began to feel his wife's pulse himself, but there was no heartbeat. What's there to check? Don't you believe me? Clara was angry. Obviously hell. Your little girl threw herself. That's it. At least it's easier for us not to get our hands dirty. Just put her in the driver's seat. It's a piece of cake. In the meantime, I think we can leave her here. She's not going to call for help, no matter how many bands she's got. Frank stood there paralyzed. Despite everything that had happened recently, he had once loved his wife dearly, and now to see her dead. Realizing he'd had a hand in it, it was wild. But Clara was right. The body could be left here for the time being without worrying about it being discovered so quickly. Frank shook himself out of his daze. Okay, what do you say? Quietly he answered Clara. Let's at least cover it with something. Just to be safe. Clara went into the next room and brought out a couple of dirty cotton coats, tossing them carelessly on Nancy. She left the room. Frank took one last look at his dead wife and followed. Nancy heard a car pull away from the house. While her captors were in the house, she was afraid to even begin to breathe, let alone move. Her whole body ached unbearably. The wounds on her arms were badly posterior, though the blood had already stopped flowing. The cotton batting Clara had covered her with stank horribly. When Nancy took her first breath, she nearly vomited. As she struggled to get out from under them, she finally tried to regain her breath. Now she thanked God that she had decided to take up yoga and mastered this difficult breathing technique, slowing her heartbeat to a lower limit. If Frank and Clara had been a little more persistent, they would have waited for another heartbeat. But Nancy had been lucky. Either the kidnappers were scared, or they were just very willing to take the expected for granted. But now the girl had time on her hands. She remembered that a couple of scoundrels had mentioned near the house. Rarely, but still people showed up, so I just had to stand under the window and watch for passersby. The problem was that from the high window there was nothing to see, and Nancy had no strength left to stand for hours waiting for rescue. She was unbearably thirsty, and the kidnappers had not even left her any water, for the corpse had no need of it. Nancy tried again to cut the ropes, but the long weave did not give in. Besides, the wounds started again. Abandoning these attempts, the girl tried to look at the problem from the other side. If it is not possible to break the ties, you can try and bend, and try to pull the hands forward. It was the wrists that were bound. Thanks to all that yoga, Nancy was quite flexible. She'd seen a couple of movies where characters had done such tricks, but she'd never tried it herself. Nancy strained her ligaments and twisted her joints as hard as she could. By some miracle, she succeeded. When the girl saw the bound hands in front of her, she cried with joy, despite the fact that all the skin was covered with deep scratches and abrasions. Now the only thing left to do was to somehow try to untie the knot. Nancy tried to do it with her teeth, but the rope was synthetic, and the knot itself was too tight and tangled. Only now the girl realized why the nails were slipping so persistently, but she managed to free her legs. For some reason, they were not as securely fastened as the arms. Nancy experienced inexpressible relief when finally left her ankles. The rope was now covered with gruesome welts. Frank was probably the one who tied up his wife. Not the least bit sorry for her when he intended to immobilize her and pity me, Nancy reasoned. If they're going to send me to the other world, they certainly wouldn't think twice about a couple of bruises. The question is another. Why on earth would they intend to get rid of me? Nancy really didn't understand. With Frank, they had already been married for 6 years. There hadn't even been a single more or less serious quarrel in that time. Their only point of disagreement was that the girl didn't want to have children. At first, Frank thought that she was simply not ready. But during the 3 years of married life, he realized that Nancy was firm in her convictions. She didn't see herself as a mother at all. She didn't get a thrill from all kinds of cradles, rattles, strollers, and videos from the net with funny babies. And the sight of mothers walking their offspring in the yard caused disgust. Frank, on the other hand, dreamed of an heir. A couple of times there were conflicts, the right out of which always came out Nancy. She managed to convince the spouses in their views for a time he really accepted them. But some time passed, and Frank again raised the subject. He even tried to tamper with his wife's birth control pills. When Nancy found out about it, she didn't start a scandal. She just did. She went to the hospital and got an IUD inserted. There was nothing the husband could do about it. Gradually, the baby talk stopped. Frank just accepted that his wife was like that and hoped that one day the maternal instinct in her will still take over. But the girl doubted that the unwillingness to have children was the cause of the crime. It was much easier to divorce and find a suitable woman, or even take one with ready offspring. Especially Frank wouldn't have had any trouble with that. The guy was damn good looking, educated, well-mannered, quite well-to-do. Such men, as she liked to say, found a friend Alice on the row is not lying. Could it be money? A year ago, Nancy became the owner of a huge fortune, inherited from her grandmother. When she learned that the last will of the deceased was to leave her only granddaughter a collection of paintings, she was not particularly happy. Classical painting she was not particularly interested in a few dozen canvases, and Hane especially nowhere was. Therefore, after consulting with Frank, Nancy decided to sell the paintings. The couple ordered an examination to at least roughly understand how much all this could cost, and were completely unprepared for the result of the evaluation. The most ordinary landscapes turned out to be unknown works by famous artists. Only the starting price of the collection at the auction was up to a couple of $100 million. It was even frightening to imagine how much the buyers would be willing to pay for it by the end of the auction. Nancy was shocked. Frank quickly realized that such a gift of fate could significantly improve the quality of their lives. One of the paintings was sold to a Chinese millionaire. There was no limit to the joy of the couple. The husband, delighted with the success, proposed to auction the entire collection. But Nancy, on reflection, declined. It seemed to her that in the painting's capital will be safely insured, and with such a demand for Russian painting for a few years will grow significantly in value. Frank seemed to accept her decision, but it was noticeable that he was upset. He could not wait to make a favorable deal and to do something more ambitious than to blow dust off the old paintings. But his wife was adamant. It seemed to her that the money received from the sale of one painting, quite enough for a comfortable life and any investment. She quietly gave the entire proceeds of Frank on his personal projects. The rest of the paintings went into a bank vault until better times. Nancy could not even imagine that this would push her husband into crime. In fact, the inheritance was her property. Frank had no rights to it. In the event of a divorce, he would get nothing. The death of his wife is another matter. He would have been the sole heir, and all problems would have been solved. But the other thing is more important. Who was this woman Clara? For all the time of their life together, the girl did not even allow the idea that her husband could have a mistress. Frank behaved as an exemplary husband, and everything indicated that he loved his wife, as well as she him. He tolerated her whims, even if they contradicted her views. He was never absent for long periods of time. Even with these paintings, he gave up easily enough. Had he only pretended, and already in his mind a plan had been born for Nancy to shake off these thoughts. So she said aloud, something had to be thought of right away. Those two could come back at any moment. There was no precious time to lose. Her bound hands were in the way, but the circulation in her legs was already fully restored. Nancy went to the door and held the handle. It was padlocked shut. The door looked pretty sturdy. Nancy, with her frail build and partial immobility, was not going to be able to kick it open. That left the window. The girl went to it, stood on tiptoe, looked through the gaps in the boards. In front of the house, there was a rather vast wasteland, piled with boards of wood from time and dampness. Next to the pile of rotting wood stood a rusty Soviet-style truck. Some kind of old bathtub filled with dark water. Nancy's gaze came upon a fence. It was wooden, but quite high. Where the boards were missing, you could see the road through them. As Nancy stood at the window, 2 cars passed by. She tried to call for help, but the road was too far away. and through the open window her voice was unlikely to penetrate the street. Nancy, powerless, sank to the floor. She was beginning to lose hope. Besides, she was tormented by an intense thirst. The girl realized that a little more and she would die a quite natural death of despair. Large tears rolled from her eyes. Without knowing it, Nancy fell asleep. She was awakened by a noise outside. Startled, the girl quickly jumped up and went to the window. There was someone walking around the house. It was already dusk outside, so she had to look for a long time, and the girl heard a man's voice. Who are the owners? Jesus. Nancy's heart was pounding. People, we have to get your attention right away. I'm here, shouted the girl with all her might, coming close to the window. Help, for God's sake, help, I'm inside. The man who was walking around the house apparently did not hear her. Nancy began pounding on the boards with her bound hands and kept calling for help. At some point, her cries got through. Woman, are you all right? The man's voice got louder. He must have realized where the sound was coming from, screaming at the top of Nancy's voice. I'm begging you, help me. The man walked straight to the window. The girl saw through the slits his face. It was a rather elderly man with glasses. He met Nancy's eyes. Girl, he began. Are you here alone? Are you in trouble? For God's sake, help me out. The house is locked and my hands are tied. You can try to break the door down. The front door is iron. I'm afraid it won't work. Isn't there another way in? I don't know. Nancy started crying. We have to hurry. They could come back at any moment. Who are they? Asked the stranger. It's a long story. Nancy interrupted him hurriedly. Please find a way to help me get out, or they will kill me. The man's face showed confusion. He could see that the girl was not joking. You just don't worry. He hastened to reassure Nancy. I'll get around now. The house will look for another entrance. The room I'm in is locked too. You can break the door. It's wooden. It opens inwards. The man stepped away from the window. Nancy was afraid he would leave her here, preferring not to get involved. She shouted after him not to leave, but the stranger was no longer visible from the window. Shit, the girl cursed to herself. If only he would come back, and then I'm saved. After a few minutes, the man came to the window again. The girl, he said. I went to the car to get a tire iron. There's another door on the other side of the house. There's a padlock on it. I'll try to break it off. Just don't worry, please. Okay, Nancy said and sank heavily to the floor. Soon she heard a metallic clanking sound. Apparently a man was trying to dislodge the lock. It took him a moment, after which he quickly reached the door. The handle lingered, and Nancy tore towards the entrance. I'm in here, again she shouted. Okay, step away from the door. I'll try to kick it open. Nancy obediently stepped farther away. It took the man a few blows before the door began to give way. After another minute, the man fell out into the room with a crash. Nancy shrieked, Are you all right? Concernedly, she asked the stranger as he, affected, rose from the wreckage. It's nothing. Soothed the girl. What happened to you? Why are you bound? I'll tell you everything. But I beg you, let's get out of here as soon as possible. All right, let's go, agreed the man. He saw the poor condition of his new acquaintance, so he saw no reason to delay. I have a car not far away. Can you walk? I think so, answered Nancy. Now she was ready even to run. There's just one little problem. What's that? Nancy's chest tightened. I have a flat tire. I thought I'd go to the owners and ask for a jack. There was a look of panic on the girl's face. When the man saw it, he hurried to reassure her. He saw that she was terrified at the thought of having to stay in this house. Don't worry, we'll just drive a little way and then we'll figure it out. They left the building and headed for the gate. Nancy saw the house from the side of the dilapidated and brick-building hollow ethereal roofs, an abandoned lot with scant vegetation. Half the yard was drowned in nettles. Broken glass and stakes, ceramic tiles were lying everywhere. I wasn't sure if anyone lived here, the man explained as they walked along. But there's no houses around here, just this one. And as luck would have it, I got a flat tire. Now we'll sit down, I'll give you a rope. The car was about 100 meters from the fence. It was a pretty decent SUV. The stranger helped Nancy into it. He pulled out a large hunting knife from somewhere and with confident movements cut the thick cord into one. His hands were in a terrible state, but nothing caused them now. It would have to be treated. The cuts look pretty deep, he remarked. Nonsense. The girl tried to smile. Please, let's get out of here quickly. Then all that handling on a flat tire. It wasn't easy to drive. The driver tried to do it carefully. Luckily, after a couple of kilometers, they came to a gas station. Got a jack. The man got a spare tire from the trunk and changed it quite quickly. Oh, it's hard, he said, getting in the car. The old tire's a goner, of course, but the rim's intact, so it's all right. So now tell me where to take you. I live out of the way, hopefully in a classroom. Where is she supposed to go exactly? She can't exactly go home. Frank's there with that horrible woman. Neither can she go to her acquaintances. Now the girl suspected everyone in general to the police, that she will say that her husband with an unknown woman and kidnapped her. And where's the proof? Seeing that the girl is confused, the man decided to take the initiative. So he began. Let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is James, Nancy muttered, and the girl is Nancy. James said thoughtfully, what a rare name that is nowadays. That's what Nancy is. I think you're hungry. Let's go somewhere and you can tell me all about it. Nancy gladly agreed. She hadn't eaten in 24 hours. She was so thirsty that it was hard for her to speak. They stopped at a small roadside eatery. The girl immediately went to the restroom, leaving her companion to order at his discretion. She would eat an elephant right now. The restroom shone with whiteness. Nancy was even surprised. She thought places like this were unsanitary, and the tiles were scrawled with all sorts of obscene writings. She went to the mirror and was horrified at the absenteeism. Her face was in front of dried blood, her hair was tangled, mascara stains were visible under her eyes. The girl put her hands under a stream of cool water. The wounds immediately began to sting unbearably. She thoroughly washed everything with soap at Soap Her Face. Only now the girl realized that she was completely barefoot. The shoes she had been wearing the day before had been left in that horrible room. How could I go barefoot and not even notice? There was glass and rocks everywhere in the yard. It's called shock. She asked her reflection in the mirror. Thank God, there are almost no people. I don't look so bad. Nancy went out into the hall, where James was waiting for her. His order had already been brought to him. The girl hurriedly sat down at the table so that no one would see her bare feet. James, guilty, she began. I don't even know how to say it. I don't have any shoes. Really? Surprised man and looked under the table. You need to fix that right away. I have some old sneakers in my car. If you don't mind putting them on. Let me get them now, and then we'll go to the store and find something more suitable. A couple minutes later, he came back with a pair of teenage sneakers. Nancy immediately put their shoes on. They fit. My grandsons, the man explained, smiling. They bought him new ones, but he kept them. I'm an old school man. I was sorry to throw them away. I thought they might come in handy. As you can see, my instincts were right. Your instincts don't fail you in principle. If you hadn't been at that unfortunate house today, I dread to think what would have happened to me. And Nancy told James everything that had happened since last night. Yes, the man thought, there's no getting out of it. You realize you can't go home. Worse, they'll come back. They'll see that you're missing, and they'll start looking for you. They'll be driven by fear of exposure. And the intruders will realize that you won't go to the police because of the lack of evidence. What am I supposed to do? I can't even go to my best friend's house. Frank will look for me there first. I don't have any parents, only a grandmother, but she died a year ago. That's what James said, looking Nancy straight in the eye. I know my proposal will seem strange, since this is the first time you've seen me. But I can't leave you in the lurch. You can stay with me for a while, and I'll think of a way to bring your abusers to justice. You know they can't go unpunished, and you must go on with your life without fear of going out into the street. Nancy was visibly embarrassed. She was frightened not by the fact that she had to accept such a proposal from a stranger, but by the very fact that she would have to invade someone else's life so brazenly. I can see your doubts, Nancy. James was quick to reassure her. "Don't worry, you won't be a burden to me at all. I have a big apartment. I live with my cat and my son. He recently divorced his wife. He's staying with me for now. He can't live alone. And Liam, my grandson, is safe to see. His wife, the former Cindy, lets him go to his grandfather's house without question. You'll get to know each other. It won't be boring. And my son is a smart guy. He'll help you understand your complicated situation. He used to work in the organs, but he left because he couldn't bear to see how the law actually works in our country. He had a keen sense of justice that was shattered by the bureaucracy. James, thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you. I'll take you up on your offer because I have no other choice. I have no phone, no money. I don't even have the keys to my own apartment or papers. I have a spare key, but I'm afraid to go to her place. That's good. The man was happy. You'll come to your senses, and then we'll think about it. Sergey's apartment really turned out to be a huge good quality with good repair. When Nancy stepped over the threshold, a huge striped cat ran out to meet her and began to rub her feet intensively. "Meet him," laughed James. "This is Benedict. I hope you're not allergic, because he's taken a liking to you. That rarely happens. He'll never leave his side now." As if in confirmation of his master's words, the kitten gave an affirmative meow. Nancy laughed. "Don't worry," she assured James. "I love cats. My grandmother and I were Siamese. He followed me everywhere, even walked me to school. And he was so smart. Sometimes I used to swear at how human he was." Yeah, they can do that. Not all of them, though. Come on, I'll show you around. Peter's not home yet. He's away for a couple days for work. So don't be shy. The host led the guest through the rooms, showed her a bedroom where she could make herself at home. After the tour, Nancy asked to take a bath. James had prepared some clothes for her, apparently belonging to his son. "I don't think Peter will be too upset to part with a couple of shirts." James winked at her. Nancy finally relaxed into the hot water. She could only now feel how exhausted her body was. After being in the tub for almost an hour, the girl went into the kitchen. Flavored tea was waiting for her. "Here's Nancy," James told her. Walked to the table, serving jam. "I made cherry jam myself this morning." "Oh, really?" Nancy was surprised when she tasted a spoonful of jam. "It's delicious." "Yes, I have my own cherries. We have a whole orchard outside the city," laughed James. "And cooking is my hobby. I used to always fight with my late wife, who will stand at the stove, cook all these berries and vegetables. But I can't help it. I like it. And she herself admitted that I'm better at it. It's rare to get a man to do all that, isn't it?" Nancy thought. She and Frank used to buy everything ready-made. Their grandmother used to supply them with jam. Since she was a child, Nancy had loved to watch her work with berries over a huge copper basin. And then they would roll the jars together. The girl was always waiting for her grandmother to be distracted, so she could take advantage of her absence and savor the hot, sweet treat. "There's no way to force it. It's a passion," James continued. "Some are into fishing, some are into soccer, and I'm into jam. We are all different." Benedict suddenly appeared and jumped on Nancy's lap. The girl began to rub him behind the ear, which made the cat make deep trumpet sounds. It sounded more like a running tractor than a purr. After sitting with James in the kitchen for a while longer, Nancy excused herself to go to bed. The bed, though small, was very comfortable. The blanket helped her fall asleep immediately. The next morning, Nancy woke up well rested, no one bothering her. When she glanced at her watch, she was greatly surprised. It was already 12 o'clock. A normal girl would get up around 9. She got dressed and left the room. James she found in the living room. The man was sitting at his laptop. "Oh, Nancy, good morning," greeted James. "How did you sleep?" "Good morning." Nancy smiled. "Everything is just fine. I don't usually sleep this long. It's a normal reaction to stress. The body has to get its energy from somewhere to recover. Have you been stressed out a lot? Let me feed you breakfast." Nancy readily agreed. James made scrambled eggs and toast, and the deliciously brewed coffee chased away the remnants of sleep. "And now, Nancy." Sighing, James began, clearing the table. Tell me, why was your hubby going to do such a terrible thing? You must agree, it is not the most common practice to do such a thing because of disagreements. You can always get a divorce. It's not my business, of course, but I would like to have a full picture to help you move on. Nancy took a long time to collect her thoughts. When she told James about her misadventures, she hadn't gone into much detail, nor was she herself 100% sure of her suspicions. However, the explanation with the inheritance turned out to be the most logical, so she hurried to share the assumption with her savior. I think, she began, it's all about the paintings. I received an inheritance from my grandmother a year ago. At first I thought all these landscapes were just old junk, but Frank insisted on an appraisal. It turned out I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar fortune. What are these paintings? James wondered. My grandmother told me that these paintings used to belong to my grandfather. I didn't know him at all. He died when I was 2. My grandfather was a collector of paintings, but our family had never been wealthy. I can't imagine how he could have gotten such expensive paintings. As the expert said, some of them belong to the brushes of very famous Russian artists, but belong to the early periods of their work or to the so-called gift works. This is when the author wrote for his friends, and the paintings never made it beyond private collections. I wonder where your grandfather got such a treasure. We'll never know. But after he died, it all went to my grandmother, and then to me. Frank really wanted to sell it all at once to invest in some project of her own. I never took much interest in the details of my husband's work. You should have. We sold one painting. He invested the money right away. He always made good money. My questions were just dismissed. Once he tried to show me the mechanism of work, but to me all these figures and graphs always seemed like gibberish. I'm a pure humanitarian. Any formulas put me in a state of unbearable boredom. But then I was afraid to risk and said that the paintings will sell only as needed. Where are they now? They're all in a bank vault. Frank doesn't have access to them. And anyway, you see, if we divorced, he'd get nothing. My death would solve all his problems. I don't know. It would have been a lot easier to convince me to hang it up at home and order good copies, gradually replacing the originals. I never would have even suspected anything wrong. But I guess my husband wasn't that smart or didn't have the money. And the woman he was with at the time, I have absolutely no idea who she is or what kind of relationship they are in. Well, James thought, it shouldn't be too hard to find out. We already know her name and that she meets your husband from time to time. And that house, you say? She said she used to go there a lot, so we can run the owners. Yeah, but she said she didn't own the house. That's okay. Either way, the owner has something to do with her. Relative, friend, neighbor. Any information you can get. Leave it to me, please. Believe me, I have some experience in this sort of thing. Really? Nancy was surprised. No, I'm not a private detective or an agent. James laughed, seeing her reaction. I just feel it's my duty of honor to bring villains to justice. I'm former military. Really? I'm not surprised, though, seeing as how you kicked the door down with a couple of punches. No, it was just the wood was sticky enough. If I'd been younger, I could have broken it down with one. What do you think, James? Nancy asked after a moment's thought. They've already discovered I'm gone. It's not impossible, the man thought. Even if they have, they're panicking now and trying to figure out where they've gone. Given the broken door, it wouldn't be hard to guess that someone helped. The other thing is, does it realize you're still alive? And I did a pretty convincing job of playing dead. They might think someone just took my body. They might think that, James nodded. If they do, we have a chance to play the game with them, but on our terms. But we'll have to wait for Peter. I'm sure he'll be happy to help us. In the meantime, I don't recommend you leave these walls. There's a risk you might run into someone on the street and they'll pass it on to Frank. I agree, and I don't really need to go anywhere. Peter arrived the following evening. Nancy and James were having dinner in the kitchen when the owner's son came in. He was a fairly young tall man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Nancy didn't even think there was such a rich color in nature. Hi, Daddy, he greeted, catching a glimpse of the girl. I see you have company. Why don't you introduce yourself? Yes, son, come in. We're having dinner. James fussed. This is Nancy Peter. The guy extended his hand, which she shook firmly. Peter noticed that her wrists were marked with a creepy-looking scar. Long time to come, his father interrupted him. Don't get the wrong idea. This girl is in trouble, and you and I have to help her. How was it? Peter asked with suspicion in his voice as he continued to stare at Nancy. What happened? I wondered. I was robbed at the train station. I had nowhere to go. Nancy couldn't answer for some reason. She felt ashamed. For some reason, she thought her savior's son would not be happy to see her in his own home as an embarrassed girl. James came to the rescue. The son said sharply he Peter and immediately changed his expression. What, do you think I dragged all the beggars into the house? You know me, I offered Nancy to stay with us for a while. I rescued that girl from an abandoned house a few days ago, tied up and scared to death, and I feel it's my duty as a man to help her deal with her abusers. In what way is that related? Peter interrogated. Why didn't you go to the police? She wants to send me to the other world, in fact, Nancy said in a low voice. Peter was silent. He saw that the girl was serious, and from her wounded arm she confirmed her father's words. So Peter rested his hands on the edge of the table. Let's be more specific. Nancy repeated her story again, mentioning the paintings as the most probable motive for the crime. Now she herself thought the whole story was a bit crazy. But after listening to the end, Peter suddenly became interested. So I take it you're not going to go to the police. So no proof other than my word. And that's true. I was an investigator myself for a few years. I'd take a statement, but I don't think I'd make a case. The only thing left to do is either try to catch them red-handed, which is almost unrealistic, given that it would put you at great risk, or play a little with them. James suggested as well. Nancy laughed. I can tell you're his son. Very interesting. Peter looked at his father. What kind of game are you playing, Dad? We think James has taken a fancy to us. We think they're convinced Nancy's dead and someone's found her body. So maybe we should blackmail them a little bit. Might work? Peter scratched his chin. They're probably panicking and won't go anywhere. But we have to get as much information as we can. You know, Nancy suddenly exclaimed, I have a friend named Alice. She's a very nice girl. I don't think she's in cahoots with them. I'm afraid to go to her myself. I don't know if Frank will be there waiting for me. But if you talk to her, Peter, she might be able to help. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. The next day, James got information about the owners of the abandoned building where he'd found Nancy. The house belonged to a Sophia. It wasn't hard to find this woman. Peter involved old acquaintances, and in a couple of hours he had the data. The guy volunteered to personally drive to the old lady's house and make inquiries about Clara. The address was a nursing home. Peter introduced himself as the woman's grandson. Luckily for him, no one asked for any documents. A nurse escorted him to the room where Sophia lived. When Peter entered, the nose was hit by the acrid smell of medicines. The old woman was sitting at a desk reading something. Peter was sharing. Sophia, hello, he said loudly. The woman shuddered and looked up at him, her eyes hidden behind thick glasses. Good morning. She greeted him with a well-pitched and surprisingly young voice. She was 86 years old according to her documents. I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. My eyes don't look the same. Come closer. Sophia, my name is Max. I'm here at Clara's request. I brought you some fruit. Peter put a heavy bag on the table. The old lady has been sitting on her hands for a long time and she hasn't shown up. She's doing well. Yes, Sophia, Clara is working very hard. She has no time. She asked me, how could I refuse? We've been friends since we were kids, since school. The old lady asked me again. I don't remember you. Max, you say you're not Livingston. By any chance? No, Peter immediately sensed some kind of trick in the tone of the interlocutor. Sontsev, but Clara and I didn't go to the same school. If that's what you mean, I think I've softened. Sophia, I seem to remember all my students, but I don't recognize you. My eyesight, you know, is no longer the same. But I recognize every single one of my Cossacks, no matter how much time has passed. Cindy, she's one of the few people who visits me here. You'd think she'd have forgotten the old woman by now and lived in peace. No, she can't be like that. The girl's so kind to her. She's always been different from the others. It's been 21 years since graduation, and she's always with flowers and sweets. The nurse comes running to me. She only manages to grumble again, saying that your Clara came and raised everyone's ears. But I smile. I'm just glad that I taught such a smart girl. Good for you. Peter nodded to himself, thinking how cruelly mistaken this woman was. If she knew what her former student was doing, probably would not smile. Now weakened by a heart attack, no less. And you say you went to another school. Yeah, 32nd, nodded Peter. Oh, so it's right next door to ours, the 17th. Yes, it's a pity you didn't get into my class. They were my last class. I retired as soon as they graduated. And now, you see, I've fallen apart. Nobody needs me. Peter spent some more time in the old woman's company, but he could not learn anything useful, although the information he got from Sophia could be useful. Leaving the nursing home, he dialed the number of his friend from the authorities. Mish, he began quickly. Listen, it is urgent to run a person through. Don't ask anything. It'll count for something later. Oh, there was a cheerful voice on the other end of the line. But then he heard a serious matter. Write it down. Clara, age 37-39 years. Registered in the Bright Street. Probably a different address now, but she used to live there. I don't know much data. Please check life and death issues. I know yours. You probably picked up another hottie from death, didn't you? Now you're looking for where she lives so you can wait with flowers. Peter, stop being a romantic. I already divorced one of them for that. Find yourself a good woman, a good housewife, and live in peace. Mike, all wrong, started Peter, but in time realized that it is not worth explaining that the curious comrade is not worth it. Okay, let's as the data will be dialed immediately. I'm listening and obeying, Mike sneered. The former colleague called back in an hour. He dictated to Peter 3 addresses for a woman with such data. Yes, Peter thought 3 isn't much, but it's not a lot. Considering I have no idea what this Clara looks like. All right, well, there's no traffic. Let's run down each of them. To the first address. Door was opened by a haggard-looking woman. She was in her early 60s. Good afternoon, greeted Peter. I can see Valeria. Are you for pennies? Tiredly asked the hostess. I started to Peter, but the woman was already pulling him out into the hallway. Clara got worse today. I woke up in the morning. She is lying on the floor. She must have tried to get into the stroller herself. The stroller. That's what Peter said. Yes, in a wheelchair. Didn't you know that? She's been disabled since she was a child. She can't walk since the accident, but she's still trying to get up. I'm sorry. I tried to free Peter from the woman's clutches. I must have made a mistake. I need Clara. The woman looked at him, flapping her eyes. Suddenly, it was as if she woke up. Oh, I thought, I'm sorry to drag you in like this. Didn't even recognize anything. Is it mine, Cindy? Peter went to the second address, but the stern man at the door said that Valerie no longer lives here 3 years moved to the States. He had one last address left. The house was located right next to the school number 17 mentioned by Sophia. But that should be a sure hit, Peter thought. But if it really is the same woman, he should be more careful. Tales of schoolmates won't fly. Peter pressed the bell button several times, but no one came to the door. He had already decided to come back later, when suddenly the door opened and a middle-aged woman looked out of the apartment. She asked him in a disgruntled tone, I'm sorry, Peter was confused, and I must have woken you up. My name is Max. I've just been to see Sophia, your teacher. Oh my God. Clara was worried. Something's happened to her. She had a heart attack yesterday and was composing Peter. She's fine now. They couldn't reach you for some reason? I'm next on the list. I talked to her today. She really asked me to come and see you. I'll be right there. It was obvious that Clara was very concerned about the old lady. It bothered Peter a lot. He couldn't understand how she could be so caring and cruel at the same time. Did you also study with her? Or a relative? I just don't remember her having grandchildren. I'm a distant relative, lied Peter, on my mother's side. I don't live here, so I don't get to visit her much. Oh, don't worry, they won't let you see her today anyway. I brought everything. She just said to ask where you've been. You mean you haven't visited in a while? Yes, Clara sighed. It's just the way it is. I've had a lot of problems of my own. I'm so sorry. I'll be sure to visit her one of these days. Peter said goodbye to the woman, who seemed very tired. It was obvious that Clara hadn't lied about her problems, except that Peter knew very well what kind of trouble the woman was in. Well, now he knew where she lived and what she looked like. He made the decision to sit in the car and observe her. Realizing that the woman wouldn't get out that easily, he decided to get active. He dialed the number Frank had given him from Nancy. A man's voice answered unfriendly. "Hello, Frank," Peter began. "Your wife, or rather, her body?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Frank must have digested what he heard. "What do you want?" He finally squeezed out. "How much money for silence?" "3 million. Peter said it at random. "Are you crazy?" "I don't have that amount." "What made you think you had my wife?" "It wasn't that hard to establish. And don't think that if you don't pay, you'll get off easy. I have footage of your car being at the scene for quite some time. The time of the girl's death fits right in that gap," sighed Peter. "Let's skip the details, especially now you've asked me what I want. So you really know what I'm talking about. Are you from the police?" Frank suddenly asked. "No," Peter laughed. "If I were the police, we'd be talking differently." "Okay, but I need proof. Can you send me a picture of the body?" "Sure, it'll take me a while. I'll get back to you. As long as it's still that money. If you don't raise the required amount within a week, I'll contact you. Then you'll have to deal with it another way." Peter has disconnected. Now all we had to do was wait. Half an hour later, Clara came out of the entrance and got into a car parked nearby. Peter followed her, looping through the city streets. He already guessed that she had gone to Frank's house. The woman went into the house, but Peter wasn't going to end the stakeout there. Clara stayed at Frank's for about an hour. She came out highly agitated and angry. Slamming the door, she went on her way. Peter followed her, but the woman only stopped at the store and headed home. Peter then decided not to waste any time and drove home. Anyway, so he started from the doorstep. "I tracked down this Clara of yours and called Frank with a ransom demand for the body, as Nancy had mentioned. And what did he say? He agrees, but he wants proof. He wants a photo. So Nancy, let's get you under the body. Do you still have that dress you were wearing back then?" "Yeah, I lost it actually." "That's okay, but I'll have to tie you up and stain your face with something that looks like written blood." "I have paints," said James, who came into the hallway. "I think it'll look pretty natural." It took the next half hour to cremate Nancy. Peter spread plastic sheeting in the hallway for the girl to lie on. They took a few pictures, after which the guy did a little color work, correction. When Nancy saw the pictures, she was even horrified. She really did look dead in the pictures. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked Peter. "It's going to work." The bastard didn't even blink an eye and agreed. The only thing he cared about was where to get the money. Obviously, this couple is in a panic, very afraid of exposure. All the more I frightened him, saying that I had evidence regarding the location of his car at the time of the crime. "Your eyes are so rounded, Nancy." "Wow. What if he demanded it?" "You know," sighed Peter, "I'm the blackmailer here, and I'm the only one who can demand anything." He dialed Frank's number and arranged where he could send the photos anonymously. After examining the contents of the messages, Frank became even more nervous. "How will the transaction proceed?" "You will transfer me the money to the specified details. Within half an hour, I will send you the coordinates of the body. How can I be sure that you will not cheat? Believe me, I'm only interested in money. Otherwise, I wouldn't even call you. What you do with the corpse afterwards is none of my business." Well, that was Frank. "No," but rudely interrupted Peter. "We're serious people. I don't think you need to be reminded that you shouldn't go to the police. Besides, you don't stand a chance. I'm sure your sweat and grease marks will be found on the body. So you might want to think before you do something stupid." "I understand you perfectly well." Frank snapped at me. "Not an idiot," Peter grumbled, hanging up discreetly. "A real idiot." He sat silently, thinking about something. Nancy was anxious to know the details. James had been pacing nervously for several minutes. That's what. Peter suddenly broke the silence. You said Alice had spare keys to the apartment. She does, Nancy nodded. But I don't know how to get them without giving myself away. We'll have to take our chances. There's no other way. Why do we need to get into the apartment? I think the couple would be actively planning their next move right now. Judging by the fact that Clara went to Frank's house today, it'll happen again, since the apartment was undisturbed. I plan to install a microphone so I can record conversations. I'm sensing they can talk a lot without witnesses. Peter. His father turned to him. You realize you won't be able to get those recordings in court. That's what's needed. Having such a trump card up your sleeve, you can easily divorce these lovebirds on official recognition. The main thing is a competent approach. All right, Nancy agreed. Let's go then. There's no point in delaying right now. Frank must have called his mistress by now. I don't think she'll go to him again tonight. Besides, they're both busy thinking about finding the right amount of money. But we're on our way to Alice now. Nancy. Alice shouted happily, hugging her friend. Where have you been? You can't imagine how worried I was. It's a mess at work. No one knows where you are. The phone's silent. Frank says you're sick, and you can't even pick up the phone. But I know that's not true. I've been to see you. He wouldn't even let me in. I didn't know where to look. The best part is he came by and asked me if it was summer. I was so surprised. And then I call him. Your phone is disconnected, and he's talking about this disease. I wonder what kind of sickness it is that you can't answer your friend close to you. Nancy, best friends unleashed. What I'm about to tell you must stay between us. Do you understand me? Alice looked at her intently. Nancy's tone was not at all joking. The girl realized that her friend was in some kind of trouble, and the man she came with was unfamiliar to her. Nancy introduced her companion. This is Peter, my friend. Alice is my best friend. Peter and Alice exchanged handshakes. The girl liked the man very much. She was very curious where Nancy had managed to meet such a handsome man and disappeared for a few days. Obviously, the friend had gotten into some kind of adventure. That's why Frank's so angry. Alice invited the guests into the room and sat them down on the couch. Well, she began. Tell me. Alice, please don't panic. Nancy warned her at once. The situation is as follows. Frank has turned out to be quite a scoundrel. I know it's hard to believe, but he tried to send me to the afterlife. What? Rounded his eyes. Alice, Frank, he's such a Hamlet. I'm sorry. He can't even cut up a chicken. I remember at the barbecue he stood there with a knife in his hand and cried. Alice, I'm serious. On our anniversary, he gave me sleeping pills, and then I woke up in some abandoned house, tied up. Look at this. Nancy showed me the rope marks still visible on my wrists. It's horrible, whoops. Alice, but that's not all. Nancy continued. Then Frank and some woman came there, and they were seriously discussing how to get rid of me. They wanted to cause an accident. This auntie knows people in all the agencies. No one would even dig. Accidents and accidents. I'd just be buried. Only it didn't go according to plan. I pretended to be dead. Very successful, by the way. So they had to leave my body there while they prepared the next one. That's where Peter's dad found me. Are you kidding me? Alice couldn't believe it. Why on earth would he get rid of you? You've been married 6 years? I don't even remember one serious fight. That's true, my friend. Except I think it's all about the money. Money? Alice was surprised. He makes good money. Why does he need your money? I'm not sure he makes good money anymore. Remember how he persuaded me to sell all the paintings? I only agreed to sell one. I got a good deal on that one, and I gave him every penny of it. He invested, and guess what? It's been almost a year, and I still haven't seen him make any serious profit. I mean, he's made some withdrawals, but given the amount of money he's invested, the amounts aren't commensurate. Have you talked to him about it? Of course I did, but it made sense to me at the time. He convinced me that there was no point in withdrawing the profit and that it was easier to keep it in the system so that it would work and bring in more money. She showed me all sorts of figures, but I don't understand anything about it. What do you think? I think there's no money in the accounts. According to my calculations, there should have been several million in there. In fact, there's only a few $100,000. I don't know where the money went, but now I'm pretty sure it's all mine. Frank spent on his mistress Clara this, with which they plotted to remove me. Alice has digested the information. So what do we do now? There's no way for you to go home. And we put on a little show, Peter said. These two think Nancy is dead. That's what we thought we'd take advantage of. Oh my God. Alice was horrified. I contacted Frank under the guise of the body snatchers. When they came to the house to get Nancy, they found the door broken in from the outside and no body. Now I'm charging them a tidy sum, which Peter says he doesn't have. Alice, said Nancy, we need the keys to my apartment. Peter wants to install a wiretap so we'll be aware of the couple's plans. Yes, of course, nodded Alice. You just have to get Frank out of the house somehow. You know he doesn't get out much. Don't worry about that, Nancy said. Most importantly, I beg you, don't blab to anyone that you saw me. You're kidding your lips for a long time, Alice. What do you take me for? That I put you in the clutches of these scumbags. I have some interesting information for you, Peter said into the phone. You need to come now, drop off the coordinates. Where? What kind of information? Frank asked cautiously. When you arrive, you'll find out. I hope you are collecting money. We're running out of time. Don't rush me, Frank snapped at me. I told you everything will happen. Peter sent Frank the coordinates. There was no information for him, but it was necessary to lure the man out of the house. Peter sat in the car in front of the driveway. After a few minutes, Frank came out, got into the car, and drove away. Peter wasted no time and went up to the apartment. He opened the door, disarmed the alarm system using the code Nancy had given him. He walked through the rooms and set up 3 microphones in different rooms where he thought Frank and Clara might be most likely to be. Well, he said aloud, I hope this works. He hurriedly left the apartment and called Frank again. There's been a mix-up, he reported. Don't go anywhere. I'll get back to you later. Frank cursed back, but Peter wouldn't listen and disconnected. The man quickly drove home, where his father and Nancy were waiting for him. Everything is ready, he informed his household. Peter turned on his laptop and opened some program. Let's hear what they have going on. For a long time, nothing was heard. Then Frank's voice came out. He was on the phone. Clara said, man, come over right away. I'll meet you there. About 40 minutes later, Clara arrived. Nancy could hear her heels clacking and a disgruntled voice. We're going to have to take a risk, Frank told her. Are you ready? What else is left? What do you have in mind? We need to get to the paintings. That's easy for you to say. Doesn't it bother you that only your wife has access to the vault, and she's dead? Look, all the documents in here are key to the safe deposit box. And the cell phone too. I visited the vault with her. It's rudimentary, no biometrics or anything like that. You just go to the bank, show your ID, fill out a couple of forms, and unlock the box with your own key. Who would go, I wondered? Clara grinned. You and me. Are you serious now? You think the bank employees are so stupid that you can't tell one woman from another, and you're serious. Do you two look alike in build? Do you even have a face in common? Put on a little more color. Put on a wig, her clothes, now practice signing her name. She's only been to the bank once. I don't think anyone remembers her very well. Anyway, this is our chance. And we can take it all at once, pay off the kidnappers, get rid of the corpse, and then just disappear. That's enough money for you, me and Thomas, to live on for several lifetimes. Who's Thomas? Nancy asked in a whisper. Quiet. Peter interrupted her. It's all for later. I don't know, Frank, Clara continued. The idea seems dubious to me. And if we all get in, how will you come with a confident look and show the documents? Well, who, tell me, is an exact copy of his passport photo? The most important thing is to act without hesitation, so that no one sees your excitement. All the more reason for me to be with you. In fact, if we don't take the risk, we'll be in a very unpleasant situation. If Nancy's body turns up anywhere, we'll both end up in jail. Especially since this man claims he has proof that we were at the crime scene when she died. Even if he's bluffing, we can't take any chances. I'd be the first to get suspected. I can't take you with me, of course. But what are you going to do without me? All right. After a short hesitation, Clara agreed. And they will not be embarrassed that I am 10 years older than your wife, and I'm not making it up. You don't look your age. Besides, it's hard to tell how old a woman is. Okay? Clara agreed with doubt in her voice. Tell me something. So they give us the body. What are we going to do with it? There's no way to fix the accident. It's been days. We'll have to get rid of it. I'll file a missing persons report and have the police look for it. After a while, she'll be reported missing because we won't care about the inheritance. It won't concern us anymore. We'll all go away together as far away as possible. There's nothing to keep you here. If the body turns up, how are we going to dispose of it? In the woods? Dig? No, we need another way. A safer way, you know? Suddenly, Clara added, after some thought. I have a friend who works in a chemical factory. If he's well paid, he can get nitric acid. I've heard it dissolves any organic matter without a trace. Acid? Frank asked in horror. What's the big deal? It's the perfect solution for us. No one will ever find Nancy. Let everyone dig around. Yeah, there's something to it. All right, let's buy the body first, then we'll decide. But I'll contact my contact. The rest of the conversation was of no value in terms of case information. When Clara left, Peter and Nancy looked at each other. You realize they're just going to rob me outright, Nancy said indignantly. After the previous events, it seems ridiculous, Peter grinned. Don't worry, they won't get away with it. But we can catch them in the act. I wondered, Nancy thought. Who was this Thomas they were talking to? Is there someone else in their gang that we didn't know about? I'll try to find out, Peter wondered. He didn't like the fact that there was someone else in the case either. Nancy, Peter, and James were discussing a plan of further action. There were two options. According to the first, they were to report the planned robbery and catch the criminals red-handed at the bank when the paintings were in their hands. The second option suggested a more complicated chain of events. Peter proposed to let Frank and Clara leave the bank and to catch them in the act later when they tried to get rid of the stolen goods. It was obvious that Frank would try to sell one of the paintings on the black market to get the required sum for it quickly, for time was pressing him hard. Peter knew of several suitable sites by virtue of his old service. All the more reason to know exactly where Frank would try to auction the canvas. Listening to their dialogues with Clara, after a small meeting it was decided to stop at the second option. At 12 o'clock noon, Peter and Nancy were sitting in the car parked in front of the bank branch where the vault was located. They knew what time Frank and Clara would be arriving. The couple had been making intensive preparations since the morning, discussing their every move, so all they had to do was wait for them. Around 1:30, Frank's car pulled up in front of the bank. When Clara got out, Nancy cried out in surprise. The criminals had done their best. In the clothes they had found, Clara looked exactly like her with her long black wig and glasses. Look, she turned to Peter. Well done. If I'd met her like that in the city, I'd have thought I was crazy. Very much like that indeed, nodded Peter. Tell me, are there really no biometric sensors? Strangely enough, not these days. It's enough for them that you have a key to the box, documents. I was surprised myself that they don't even require a fingerprint. But I was assured by the personal manager that the vault was absolutely secure. Personal manager, are you sure he won't notice the switch? That's just it, Nancy laughed. Frank knows perfectly well that the old employee has moved on and I've been assigned a new one. He's never seen me in person before, we've only talked on the phone. So this couple has a good chance of success. When you sign the application for access to the safe deposit box, it's authenticated by phone, just give me the code. Do they have a phone? And Peter's thinking again, let's hope they succeed. Although for us any outcome is favorable, just the punishment for theft for them will be less severe than for the attempt to get rid of you and the sale of the painting. It's ridiculous to even hope for the success of your own enemies. Nancy grinned grimly. Frank and Clara stayed at the bank for about an hour. Nancy was beginning to worry that the staff suspected something wrong and called the police. Soon, however, the couple emerged from the branch carrying bulky flat bags, each containing a canvas bag. Nancy recognized the pouches as she had personally packed the paintings in them before taking them to storage. Look, she turned to Peter. They've taken everything. See, they have 3 bags with 5 paintings in each. Well done, nodded Peter. I can't tell you anything. And here's the scoundrel himself. All right, now we can't delay. We must hear what they were going to do next. When Frank and Clara reached the apartment, Peter turned on the tape again. I told you this would work. Frank's voice was happy and excited. You're doing great. You should have seen yourself. I even believed it was you, Nancy, for a moment. You should have known how scared I was. I thought I'd get caught at any moment on a little thing. We were very lucky to have the head of the department. That woman had her eye on me the last time I was here. So all the attention was directed at me, and you didn't notice her flirting openly with me. It was funny, I noticed. Clara laughed. Women. Show a handsome man and they forget everything. So what do we do now? Let's choose a painting. I'll put it on the internet auction. If we bid low, they'll buy it fast. We've got a few days left, so we'll find a buyer. Look, there's a couple of sites. We'll put it up everywhere to be sure. Frank appeared to be showing Clara the sites. Their names were familiar to Peter. Every time they heard another name that Frank said, they typed it into the search engine. Peter nodded contentedly. That's good, he said aloud. As I thought, your husband is not original. He picked the most famous venues. How does he know them? Nancy wondered. It's not the first time he's used them. You didn't know him at all. Husband's a real piece of work. Why, I'm not even surprised, Nancy sighed, noting to herself that Peter had slipped into the first name. She decided to use his example. And now you want to pretend to be a buyer? Yes, but we need to know exactly what painting they're showing. Otherwise, we're going to be going through 100 years of bids. It's not like he's going to put it up under his own name. They're taking their time choosing. As if hearing his words, the criminals began to discuss the painting that would be their ticket to a better life. The main thing now is not to be greedy, said Frank. Look, we will have to put the most expensive painting very cheaply according to the appraisal documents. This painting is the most valuable thing in the collection, but it can be sold much more expensive than Clara reasoned. It is possible, but only at an official auction. Not forgetting that we got the paintings illegally, you cannot sell them officially. Our main goal now is to sell one painting, so that the proceeds would be enough for the ransom and our escape. We'll sell the rest gradually. Of course, we'll lose a lot of money, but we won't have to share it with anyone. And in any case, it'll be enough money for a secure old age. Not even our Thomas. That's how Clara's voice sounded more enthusiastic. Of course, then you can take care of the documents on the paintings, but that they are supposedly in my property and sell already much more expensive. Moreover, no one will report the theft. Now I'm going to ask you to take a picture of the canvas. I'm not much of a photographer. While Clara was busy taking pictures, Nancy frantically remembered which of the paintings was the most expensive. According to the expert's estimation, the intruders had stubbornly failed to pronounce either the title of the work or its author. Here it is. Suddenly she shrieked. I remembered. She told Peter which painting the scoundrels wanted to sell, but there was no advertisement with such a law on the websites. It took about 2 hours until finally the proposal was posted. I had to wait a while longer before writing to the seller so as not to arouse his suspicion. Clara called Frank. Look, we seem to have a potential client. Is he serious? The woman asked, puzzled. I can't tell you yet. He's interested, if the documents and all that. I gave him the results of the examination and hinted that the picture got to me not quite honest way. Are you crazy? Who would buy stolen goods out in the open like that? Or don't be ridiculous. Frank calmed her down. That's exactly the point. Peter realized that Frank was hooked and was eager to play the interested customer. He even asked if he could do his own due diligence before the deal. Frank agreed, but his only requirement was time. He hinted to the buyer that he needed to get the deal done as soon as possible, so lengthy appraisals were out of the question. Peter agreed, assuring him that the appraisal would take no more than an hour. It would require meeting at any convenient location with an expert he would send. Frank said that he would bring the painting at any time to wherever it was needed. Peter then gave his own address, saying that there was an art expert living there who would be willing to provide such a service. The meeting was set for the evening. All that was left was to wait. James volunteered to play the expert. He thought that Frank could recognize Peter by his voice, as he repeatedly talked to him on the phone. They prepared everything they needed. Peter went somewhere and brought some optical devices, a scalpel and jars with chemicals. Look, he turned to his father and Nancy. This is usually used to authenticate a painting. Dad, you'll need to look through a magnifying glass like this. Apply a couple of strokes of ruler and acid around the edges of the painting and write a report. I'll prepare the files. All you have to do is print it out and sign it. I got it, son. Don't worry. I hope this Frank doesn't know much about this kind of work. No, Nancy was quick to reassure him. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. He didn't even go to the initial examination with me, so you won't suspect anything. Good, Peter nodded. When the doorbell rang in the evening, Nancy and Peter locked themselves in the back room, and James went to meet the guest. Peter had set up a miniature camera in the living room, where the examination was to take place, so that everything that happened would be recorded. Greetings. James greeted the visitor. My name is Anthony. A mutual acquaintance of ours told me you'd be stopping by today. Please come into the room. Let's not waste any time. Yes, nodded Frank, holding a large rug in his hand. I hope it's not a long process. It all depends on the condition of the cloth. James played the expert with conviction. I tend to see the originals right away. On the other hand, my client said that the painting belongs to the unknown works of this artist, but there are some features characteristic of his brush. Don't worry, I'm a specialist just on it. So it shouldn't be too difficult to identify a non-original. I don't think you would take up my time by bringing the copy here. Of course not, Frank exclaimed hotly. I have the official report in hand, but the client insisted on an additional examination. And his wish is law. Let me take a look. Frank handed James the papers. The man studied the contents of the document for a long time, nodding for conviction. I see you've gone to a good specialist, he said. He read the paper to the end. A former colleague of mine. You can trust his judgment. But let's take a look at the paintings. James carefully divided the canvas into steel, turned on the lamp, and began to manipulate, giving the appearance of professional work. Frank watched his actions carefully. James realized that he was very nervous, but continued, trying not to be distracted by the visitor. Look at this, he turned to Frank. You see, these strokes are characteristic of the artist. Few people have painted in such a technique. It's very difficult to replicate. The Rockefellers are talking about the age of the canvas. It's a match. We'll do a little more chemical analysis, and then we're done. James applied a small amount of the reagents, waited a couple of minutes, and dedicated an ultraviolet lamp to the treated area. Well, after a while, he informed Frank, I can say with certainty that we have the original in front of us. Who would doubt it? Replied Frank. Now I will print you a report, so our client can be sure that everything is in order. I will call him now to verbally confirm that he can safely purchase the painting. While Frank packed the canvas back up, James pretended to be on the phone. He printed out the file his son had prepared, signed it, and escorted Frank out, telling him that he could contact him at any time, should such services be needed again. When the visitor left, Nancy and Paul came out of their hiding place. So is everything all right? James smiled. Now it's up to you. The meeting with Frank was scheduled for 12 o'clock. The place for the transaction was a small office, which Peter had rented in advance so that nothing would arouse the seller's suspicions. The office consisted of a reception area and 2 rooms. The first, Peter set up his workplace. In the second sat Nancy in the company of 2 employees from the investigation committee, Peter's old colleagues whom he had brought up to speed. A girl who also worked for the police was put in the reception area and had to pose as a secretary. When she entered Peter's office and informed the visitors everything was already ready for the play, Frank entered, carrying the same coffee in his hands. Hello, he shook Peter's hand. Let's not introduce ourselves to each other. I think it's unnecessary. Good afternoon. Frank responded to the handshake. Peter's voice sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. I second that. Let's get this done as soon as possible. Anthony called me yesterday and said everything was fine. I'll take a look at the picture myself. If I'm satisfied, I'll wire you the money right away. Is that okay? Quite, Frank nodded. How about some coffee? Peter asked. I wouldn't say no, nodded Frank. Sitting down in the chair, Peter pressed a button on the switchboard and asked the secretary for 2 coffees. A couple of minutes later, Nancy entered the office from the next room, holding a tray with 2 cups. Frank sat with his back to her, so he didn't immediately notice when she came up to his side, placing one of the cups next to her. And he turned around to thank her, then froze with his mouth open. The next second, he rushed to the front door, but it was locked. To no avail. Pulling the knob, Frank tried not to look at his wife. Frank suddenly turned to him. Sit down, please. He stood for a few seconds in indecision, then obediently sat down in the chair. What's going on with your voice? He asked. Can't you guess? Nancy answered him. Frank felt his palms sweating. He looked at his wife, and they ghosted. See, darling, calm down. She went on. It's all over. Are you alive? Barely moving his tongue, he said. But how did I see your corpse myself? I know, darling, she smiled. I'm a good actress. Aren't you? Who are you? Frank turned to Peter. I'm the one who gave your wife a chance to take revenge on her abusers. Are you with the police? No, Peter said absent-mindedly. And then Frank realized he was the man he had spoken to on the phone. What are you up to? He asked angrily. Do you think you can accuse me of anything? You have no proof. In short, no one will believe even the convincing ones. That's where you're wrong, Peter interrupted him. We have more than enough evidence. All your conversations with Clara were recorded, as was your visit to the expert. Even if we can't get you for attempted murder, believe me, you'll go to a place not so far away for grand larceny. That shouldn't be too hard to prove. I think the bank records will suffice. And keep in mind that not only you, but also your friend will suffer. She was the main perpetrator, taking the paintings from the box. It was all her, Frank said after a moment's pause, sighing heavily. Nancy, I didn't mean to. I swear to you. Didn't mean to what? His wife looked at him scornfully. Getting rid of me, we've heard everything from planning the accident. You drugged me with sleeping pills on the day of our anniversary, ruthlessly tied me up, and didn't even make sure I was really dead. You brazenly stole from me, and then you say you didn't mean to. You don't know anything. Don't tell me you were forced, sighed Peter. I realize that you're going to start shifting the blame to the other person, although it's obvious that you're both to blame. Frank was silent for a long time, picking the armrest with his fingernail. He realized that he couldn't get away with it. Unless these people were lying. It was clear from their faces that they were determined. The truth would have to be told. He did not expect Nancy to forgive him, but there was still hope inside him that his wife and her acquaintance would show him some mercy. If he repented for what he had done, Clara Frank had met him 4 years ago. At that time, he was already 2 years married and really loved his wife. However, marital happiness was marred by the fact that Nancy did not want children. Unlike her, Frank literally raved about having a child. He dreamed of a son, but any conversations with his wife on this topic did not bring results. The man did not understand how this could be. Both were healthy and had a stable income, their own home. In the eyes of the public, their couple was ideal. Alas, Nancy's maternal instinct was completely absent. One day, after another attempt to persuade his wife to have children, defeated Frank went to the nearest bar. He had already drunk more than 1 glass of whiskey when he saw an attractive woman next to him. The conversation started immediately. The pretty blonde introduced herself as Clara. She was well into her 30s, but her personal life was not going well. The woman had been through a divorce, and it turned out that she shared the same problem with Frank. Clara's ex-husband did not want to have children, and this was the reason for the divorce. Clara did not want to give birth just for herself, so a child from a casual relationship was out of the question. The woman dreamed of a full-fledged family. As they say, either everything or nothing. Desperate, she chose the second option. Frank also shared his worries about his wife and their future together. Under the influence of strong drink and common grief, Frank and Clara did not notice how they found themselves in the same bed. The man never thought of cheating on his wife, but then something came over him. In the morning, he repented of his deed and, leaving the apartment, tried to forget about what had happened. However, the new acquaintance did not get out of his head. He went several times to the bar where they met, but the woman was not there. Then he decided to go to her house. Frank himself did not know why, but something irresistibly drew him there. Clara met him, surprised. She had never expected that the casual acquaintance from the bar would show up again. From then on, they began to see each other constantly. Every chance they got, Frank drove to her place. Nancy had no idea. He didn't want to lose his wife, but he wasn't going to give up his mistress either. And then Clara told him that she was pregnant. Frank at first did not even believe it, but while the information gradually reached him, he became more and more confused and seriously, still not believing, he asked Clara, "Yes, I went to the ultrasound yesterday. It's already 8 weeks. Is the due date a boy or a girl?" "Stupid?" asked Frank. "Silly," laughed Clara. "How can you tell at this stage? You have to wait. So you mean you're going to keep the baby?" Frank was surprised. Of course, Clara said it as if she had been slapped in the face. "How can I get rid of it? A child is all I've ever dreamed of. You realize you'll have to raise it alone." Even so, the woman replied sadly, "Will it all work out somehow?" "No, Clara, you mustn't think so." Frank contradicted her hotly. "I won't leave you alone with the baby." "Do you mean to say that he will divorce?" The woman was surprised. If necessary. But time passed, and Frank was in no hurry to tell his wife about his second woman. First, he was afraid of hurting her, and then it was silly to start a conversation. Clara was not satisfied with this state of affairs. She constantly reminded the man of his promise. But Frank found another excuse. When Clara gave birth, she calmed down for a while. All her thoughts were devoted to her newborn son Thomas. She was quite satisfied with the fact that Frank visited them every day, gave gifts, bought everything necessary for the baby. He was deceiving his wife, telling her that all the money he was earning was invested. In reality, any profits he immediately withdrew and gave to Clara and Thomas. He didn't want them to need anything, so he preferred to deceive Nancy, who continued to be clueless. It suited her just fine that her husband had stopped pestering her to have a child. He successfully concealed his left-handed adventures. Constant fluctuations in exchange rates led to the fact that Frank lost on another deal a very large amount. At that time, Thomas was already 2 years old. One day he came to Clara and told her about his financial difficulties. The woman reacted rather aggressively. She is used to getting everything from her lover, just ask for it. But this time her desires and his possibilities were at odds. "How long will it last?" she asked unhappily. "I can't say yet, but we'll have to tighten our belts for the next few months. I know you wanted a car, but I can't buy you one yet. Do you have any idea how hard it is without a car when you have a small child? I can take you anywhere." Frank tried to defend himself. "Of course you can. And what if you need to go to the hospital at night? That you leave your wife and rush to us? I find that hard to believe." "Clara, yeah, you say something like that. I'll be there if you call me. That's my son. What's stopping you from always being there for your son?" The woman rebuked me. "You're doing well, I see. You think if I don't bring up your divorce, I've forgotten everything? No, darling, I'm tired of living like this. It's up to you. Either you do it right now or you get out of our lives." Clara Frank had never expected his mistress to demand such decisive action from him. He had already gotten used to the way things had turned out, so he had stopped thinking about divorce. But now to leave Nancy was simply necessary, otherwise he would lose his son. Clara was a pretty tough person, so she would hardly go back on her word. "All right, I'll file divorce papers shortly." But when Frank returned home, Nancy shocked him with the news of the inheritance. And when it turned out that his wife became a millionaire overnight, Frank, thinking that now was not the right time to leave her, especially when they sold the first painting, he immediately became the owner of a tidy sum, which his wife gave to his business without even blinking. Frank immediately bought Clara a car and explained that, since the situation has changed, It is better to wait a little with the divorce, trying to get even more money. Satisfied with the gift, Clara changed from anger to mercy, agreeing to wait. But as time went on, she was in a hurry to sell the canvases. No matter how Frank persuaded her, the problem was that the woman was not interested in money at all. All these profits, exchange rate fluctuations, and other financial things caused in her even more longing than talking about the child. However, she was well aware that painting could be a good investment and a reliable insurance for a rainy day. When Frank explained all this to Clara, the woman became enraged. She realized that the man was not going to divorce, and the money was quickly melting away. It was necessary to find a way out. And one day she suggested a terrible thing to Frank. "Listen, darling," she began affectionately when Frank arrived again. "Tell me, do you love Nancy?" "What are you starting again?" Frank replied unhappily. "And I mean it. No, don't think so. I'm not going to start the topic of divorce again right now." "What then?" the man muttered. He had already subconsciously sensed in Clara's tone some kind of trick. "But do you love her or not?" She insisted. "No, I don't." "You realize I'm with her now, don't you? It's only because of these features of living paintings that I'm trying to get her to sell something. Business is slow. If I don't get any money soon, I won't be able to help you like I used to." Clara said cryptically. "What are you willing to do for Thomas and me?" "Anything," Frank replied passionately. "Anything." Clara smiled. "Then listen to what I have in mind. You won't get anything after the divorce, right?" "That's right," nodded Frank. "What if Nancy dies?" "If she dies, all her property goes to me. I'm the only heir, and she has no relatives." "Well, there's your answer." Clara continued to smile. "I don't understand. What's the answer? What makes you think Nancy is going to die? She's not even 30. No, she's healthy as an ox. You know, honey, there are 1,000 accidents in the world every day." "Wait a minute." Suddenly Frank figured it out. "Are you suggesting we take her out? Fake an accident? What's the big deal?" The woman shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "What's the big deal? It's a living person. What right do we have to send her to the afterlife? It's a crime." "Clara, are you going to lecture me now?" "You know what I don't like? My plan is failing. Forget about coming here. We don't want your money or you. And don't even think I'll ever be your underground son." Clara knew how to manipulate Frank. He was really willing to do anything for Thomas. He sat there at a complete loss, realizing that the woman wasn't kidding. If he crossed the threshold of the apartment now, he would never see them again. Good. He sighed heavily. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know yet. I just suggested it." Clara said smugly. "Honestly, I didn't think you'd say yes, did I?" "Yes, I'm a rascal." To send his beloved wife to the grave for the sake of his son. Very Shakespearean. Frank chuckled. Lady Macbeth, too, he thought, looking at Clara. They'd do anything for money. Filthy woman. If it hadn't been for Thomas, I would have left a long time ago. But he had no choice. He felt sorry for Nancy. He'd grown used to her over the years. And she was a good person. Should she have given in to his entreaties and sold those stupid paintings? It was her own fault. She should have been so stubborn. A couple days passed when Clara called to say she had a plan. Frank rushed right over. "You're going to do this," the woman began. "It's your anniversary the other day. Here, Mike, give her some sleeping pills. Then put her in the car and see her at the address I'll give you. I'll meet you there." Frank did everything Clara wanted him to do. When Nancy passed out, he carried her to the car and drove her to some abandoned house. There wasn't a soul around. Inside, Clara was already waiting for him with ropes. Together, they tied the girl up tightly and locked her in a room. In the morning they returned, horrified to find Nancy dead. This outcome partially disrupted their plans, but Clara assured them that it would not be a serious problem. She had connections through which she expected to make it look like an accident. The problem came later when they arrived and the door was open. The body was gone. Clara didn't understand how anyone could have gotten into the house. But the fact remained. They were now in a very unpleasant situation. Both of them had no idea what to do. What frightened them most of all was that the corpse had fallen into the hands of the police. But Clara argued that the chances of that happening were extremely remote. And even if it was, there was no evidence that they had anything to do with Nancy's death. At first, Frank offered to report his wife missing, but Clara demanded that he hold off. And then we got the kidnappers. You know what happened next? Frank sighed heavily. Why didn't you tell me you had a son? Nancy asked. Do you think I would have acted like a brute? What would you have done? Pat me on the head. It's treason, Mother. Of course, I wouldn't have been happy about it. But I loved you, and I knew you wanted a child. It could always have been amicable. What are you talking about? It's easy to talk about it now, when it's already happened. You'd have just thrown me out of the house and left me penniless. Even so, Nancy argued. But is that any reason to decide to commit a crime? You know me well. I don't leave my loved ones in distress. If you talked to me, I'd have given you a couple of those ill-fated paintings just to get you out of my life forever. What's the use of talking about it now? Frank said sorrowfully. You can't undo what you've done, Nancy. I'm really sorry about what happened. If I had the chance to make it right, I would have done everything in my power. And what happens now? Now you're going to be arrested, Peter said calmly. You realize that even after a confession, you can't just let it go. Of course, it all depends on Nancy whether she'll claim an attempt on her life, robbery, and all that. But I'd do my best to punish you, Valerie. You questioned the life of another human being, driven by your greed. I am willing to be punished, nodded Frank. Just please don't hurt Clara. She has a small child. Thomas won't survive on his own. How's that working out? With one eyebrow raised, Peter asked, according to you, this woman is to blame for everything. And now you want her to get away with it. And in the bank, she was the person who took the paintings from the vault. No, Frank, it doesn't work that way. She's the mastermind. She's not going to get away with it. Then we can make it look like I forced her to do it. You see, I have to spend the next few years in prison anyway. Thomas will have no one to take care of him. I am taking care of him. Nancy suddenly blurted out, which raised Frank's eyebrows. What do you mean, you? You can't stand children. Why would you do all that? And why would you care about the child of someone who almost took your life? It's called humanity, Frank, sighed Nancy. I have enough money to take care of the child until his parents are released. I'm not going to claim him, but I agree to be a guardian. In spite of everything, I don't want to ruin anyone's fate. But I can't let this woman go free without realizing the consequences of her actions. Thank you, Frank said only. After these words, the operatives came out of the room and charged Frank. They had his full confession in their hands. The man obediently put up his hands to have the handcuffs snapped on him. The investigation lasted 4 months. Frank and Clara were charged with fraud and grand larceny, attempted sale of stolen property. Nancy decided not to report her kidnapping after all, even though Peter tried to insist otherwise. Peter, she persuaded him. Look, it didn't work out, all right? They're already facing a lot of jail time for the paintings. There'll be time to think about everything they've done. It's up to you, of course. The man shook his head. But I think a criminal should be punished for his actions. That's exactly what they did. It didn't work out. So in fact, there were no actions. I forgave them, and I drove them to despair. I should have just left him when I realized that he wanted a child, and I didn't. Kept spoiling his life. I feel sorry for that woman. Honestly, I do. I'm not excusing her. She's punishing herself more than our law can do. She's condemned herself to be separated from the son she loves. How much do you think they'll get? Well, with a plea of cooperating, I'm thinking 5 to 6 years. If they behave, they could get out early. You're seriously considering taking custody of Thomas. Of course, I promised. A child shouldn't have to suffer for the sins of his parents. And I'd rather have him than in an orphanage. Frank and Clara have reached a verdict. Both of them, as Peter said, were sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in a general security colony. Nancy returned to her apartment, but this time not alone, but in the company of a little boy. Thomas was 3 years old. He was already talking well. Nancy was even surprised at how connected the child's sentences were. She furnished a nursery for the baby and put him in kindergarten. Every day she took him to the nursery before work and picked him up afterward. Very soon, she became very attached to the child. Without realizing it, Peter often came to visit. He said that the kid should see a man in front of him. As an example, she only spoiled him a lot. The girl argued, but realized that Peter was right. Sometimes they went together to James's, where Thomas found a wonderful friend in the person of good-natured Benedict. A close spiritual bond developed between the boy and the cat. Nancy was preparing for New Year's Eve with little Thomas, and they went to the mall to buy gifts and Christmas toys. Nana, Thomas addressed her. For some reason, he had nicknamed Nancy that and stubbornly refused to change his habit. "We'll buy a cake. Do you want cake, honey?" Nancy smiled. "Sure, we'll get cake and tangerines and colored balloons. And then you and I will go to the Christmas tree market." "Hooray!" shouted the joyful boy. "Christmas tree, have you asked Santa for a present yet?" Nancy asked the boy. "Yes." Squinting his eyes, the little boy answered. "And what, I wondered, did you ask him for?" "I won't tell," Tom replied stubbornly. "Well, tell me." Nancy patted him by the hood. "I promise I won't tell anyone." Honest. More honest than an honest puppy. Thomas said this with his lips pressed together and stared at the floor in silence. A puppy. Nancy was surprised. A real one. Sniffled the child. "Don't you think the puppy will freeze while Santa Claus is bringing it from the North Pole to you?" "He's got a fur coat, a warm nanny." "And that's right," smiled Nancy. Of course, a dog was not part of her plans, but for some reason she wanted to fulfill the boy's wish. Having collected a whole mountain of purchases, they went to the Christmas tree market. To Nancy's surprise, there was James, who was also buying a Christmas tree. "Nancy," the man greeted her. "What a meeting. I see you're getting ready for the holiday too." "We're going to buy the biggest tree we can," Tima proclaimed. "Like this one." "Wow, serious plans," laughed the man. He helped his friends choose a tree and load it into the car. "How about we all celebrate New Year's Eve together?" "Yay," Thomas rejoiced. "On it, we're going." "It's kind of embarrassing." Nancy was embarrassed. "Nancy, why are you embarrassed?" James asked. "We're not strangers. Both Peter and I would be very happy. Don't say no." "All right," agreed the girl. She was glad that these men, who had become part of her life under such dubious circumstances, had not left it, even when it was over. On New Year's Eve, she pulled up to the James house with the one and only. Taking gifts of groceries out of the trunk, she handed the boy a dressed-up box so that he could personally present his gift to his beloved grandfather. Thomas personally chose what to give James. It was a funny Christmas sweater that immediately caught the child's attention in the store. But she asked Nancy would Grandpa like it. Of course he would. She hastened to reassure the child. "It was you who chose it, you say," the child suddenly added. "Mommy and Daddy are coming too." The question stumped Nancy with the topic rarely asked about his parents. The boy was told that they had to go away for work, but would be back very soon. But it was noticeable that the child missed them a lot. Although Nancy tried to do her best to divert his attention, the door was opened by Peter. It was noticeable that the man was very happy to see the guests. Together, they walked into the beautifully decorated living room, in the center of which was a huge Christmas tree. Tom immediately rushed to look at the toys in the company of his favorite cat. "And we have presents," Nancy said cheerfully. "James, these are for you." The girl handed the owner her box, and the subject quickly ran up to give his gift as well. Yes, this is for you." The boy was literally glowing with happiness. When James took out of the box a brightly colored sweater from the snowman, he laughed for a long time, but immediately went to change clothes. "This is for you, Peter." Nancy smiled shyly, handing the man a brightly colored package. Inside was a kaleidoscope. "What a thing." Peter marveled, and laughing. We together with the theme chose not the most serious gift, even children's I understand. But for some reason it seemed to me that it is the one that will give you bright emotions. All the more difficult to give a man something really necessary. "Nancy, this is a wonderful gift. Imagine, I had one just like it when I was a kid, but small. I used to play with it a lot, especially when I was sad. I don't know how you came to buy it. But I'm very glad, really," the girl smiled. "Clean," nodded Peter. And I've got something for you too. He took from the shelves a large box in which Nancy found a bracelet of surprising beauty. Jesus, Peter, it's so expensive. Are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? It's a gift. Please don't make me feel guilty. I took so long to pick it out. I really like it. Let's put it on right now. Peter clasped the clasp on her slim found wrist, and the piece looked even better. Nancy blushed thickly. Alice insisted that the wedding be organized in nature. They put up tents everywhere, hung garlands of flowers and lights. There were not many guests, but the company was very friendly. A small orchestra was invited. Live music created a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. Immediately after the registry office, the newlyweds arrived at the glade prepared for the celebration. Nancy wore a stunningly beautiful dress, a tiara in her hair, and a bracelet on her wrist, given to Peter on New Year's Eve. From that very day, the girl did not part with the jewelry, considering it a personal lucky. In the summer, Alice prepared a wonderful holiday. Guests danced, enjoyed treats, the patronage of which was taken by James. He sweetly with the guests, talking about his culinary secrets. The girls literally clung to the charming chef. During the time during which Thomas went to the daycare center, Nancy managed to make friends with many moms whose children went to the same group. Some of them she was happy to invite to the wedding, because now they had so many common themes. Contrary to her expectations, motherhood was not as overwhelming a task as she had always thought. Of course, Nancy realized that Tema was not her son. But thanks to this boy, she was able to accept the responsibility she had always dreaded. It seemed terribly foolish to her, even now, the fury with which she had persuaded her ex-husband that children were unnecessary. It was all the fault of banal fear. But as they say, you can't beat a wedge. When Thomas came into our lives, there was no turning back. She always honored the commitments she made. It wasn't long before she realized that a baby wasn't the scariest thing on the planet. And when it became clear to her that it was possible to have a constructive dialogue with him, then it became clear that motherhood is also very interesting. Thomas grew up very quickly. The boy was already 4 years old. He was getting bigger and smarter. Peter thought it was right to teach him to read. Very soon it became clear that the child showed great interest in the new hobby. Then Nancy decided not to stop there and gave him to an English learning group for preschoolers. And there Thomas did not fail. The girl was glad that her boy is developing so rapidly. Alas, as much as she wanted to, the boy was still not hers. Sometimes Nancy had fits of unbearable longing. She realized that in a few years Tema's real parents would return and the child would have to be given away. But for the time being, she didn't want to think about it at all. The newlyweds went on a wedding trip together with Thomas. James volunteered to babysit. He told the newlyweds to think about nothing and enjoy themselves. And so they did. 2 months later, Nancy realized she was pregnant. At first, she was wildly frightened when the gynecologist confirmed her fears. The girl sat in confusion, looking at one point on the wall. "Will you keep it?" the doctor asked dryly. "What?" Nancy asked again. "I'm asking. Do you plan to keep the baby?" "Of course," the girl answered, not very confidently. "It's just that you look so confused. That's why I'm asking." "First pregnancy?" "Yes," nodded the bewildered Nancy. "But it's no big deal. Now, then we'll put you on the registry. All that remains is to wait." "Thank you," she muttered and left the office. She didn't dare to dial Peter for a long time. Somehow it happened that they had never brought up the subject of a child. Peter remembered perfectly well what his wife's unwillingness to have children had brought him to. He already had a teenage son, so the question was not as acute as it had been with Frank. Everyone was already used to Thomas as if he were his own child. "Sashenka." Nancy spoke to her husband in a trembling voice when he answered the phone. "Yes, darling, your voice is shaking. Is everything all right?" Worried Peter. "Don't worry, everything's fine." Nancy hastened to reassure him. But for some reason she herself cried. "Nadia, what's wrong with you? I can hear you. Are you crying? Well, speak quickly. Peter, please come and pick me up. I'm texting you the address right now." "Sure, Tuck. Just don't cry so fast." Peter wasn't fooled. 10 minutes later, he was there. Hope sat on the bench looking resolved. He came over to his wife and sat next to her. "Well, tell me, what happened?" In a serious tone, he began. Peter, still in a trembling voice, answered Nancy, "You and I are going to have a baby." The man at first thought he had misheard. So sudden and unexpected did this news seem to him. Then he realized that his wife was serious. He jumped up from the bench and scooped Nancy up in an armful, surrounding her. "Is it true?" With burning eyes, he asked, looking at the confused Nancy. "On the face of it, so don't say anything. I can see by your silly look that it's all pure truth." Nancy laughed and cried at the same time. She felt so at ease in this man's arms, and she realized that he was the one who was to be the father of her child. "Peter," she whispered, "is this really happiness?"